There is a cave somewhere in the land of Oo. Not especially large. Not especially dramatic from the outside, just a dark opening in the side of a rocky hillside, with the kind of quiet around it that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. Inside, the walls are covered in hand-painted murals, an artwork layered over artwork, and the accumulated visual record of 1,000 years of living. A bass guitar leans against a wall. Strawberries sit in a bowl on a crooked little table, most of their red drained away to a pale, colorless husk. And somewhere deeper in, a figure floats with her dark hair drifting like ink in still water, half asleep, half something else entirely. Not quite at peace, but not quite restless either. Just existing, the way only someone very old and very tired and very much alive learns to exist. That is Marceline. And her story is one of the most beautifully sad, quietly triumphant, painfully human stories that Adventure Time ever had the nerve to tell. It is a story about a girl who lost everyone and everything, over and over again across 10 centuries. And who kept going anyway. Who kept playing music anyway. Who kept making art on cave walls anyway. Who kept loving people, even knowing what love costs when you are the one who never stops aging on the inside while the rest of the world moves on without you. So settle in. Get comfortable. Let the world outside go quiet for a little while. This is the entire story of Marceline the Vampire Queen. From the very first breath she drew into the ash-choked air of a ruined world, all the way to the moment she finally found the place she had been looking for her whole life. It starts, as so many things in Adventure Time do, with the end of everything. Part 1. The Girl Born in the Ruins. To understand Marceline, you have to understand the world she came into. Not the land of Oo with its candy kingdoms and wizard cities and talking dogs. The world before that, the one that burned. And to understand the world she came into, you have to sit with the fact that the world before the land of Oo was, in the show's quietly stated logic, our world. Or something very much like it, a world with television and sitcoms and motorcycles and VHS tapes and the particular comfort foods of a late 20th century civilization. A world that had managed, through the combination of talent and ambition and spectacular poor judgment, to build something substantial and then dismantle most of it in what the survivors call the Mushroom War. The name is deliberate in its vagueness. The show does not tell you exactly what happened. It tells you the shape of it, something nuclear, something biological, something that crossed the threshold from damage the world could recover from into damage the world had to become, something entirely different to survive. The sky changed color. The land mutated. The rules of physics acquired exceptions they had not previously possessed. Magic became possible or became accessible in ways it had not been before. The world that burned became, over centuries, the world of Oo. The Mushroom War. That is what the inhabitants of Oo call it, 1,000 years later, when they speak of it at all. It is a deliberately vague name for something deliberately devastating. What the show gives us in fragments and glimpses and half-heard history is the picture of a civilization not entirely unlike our own, somewhere in the early 21st century or thereabouts, that managed to destroy itself through a combination of warfare, magic, and something deeply wrong being unleashed upon the land. Bombs fell. Cities collapsed. The sky darkened. The earth mutated. People scattered or died or became something other than what they had been. Whatever it was that humanity built over thousands of years of effort and hope and fumbling progress, most of it was simply gone. Erased. Reduced to rubble and ash and the echo of what used to be. Into this came Marceline. She was born before the worst of it. Her father was Hunson Abadir, the Lord of Evil, the ruler of the Nightosphere, a hellish, soul-consuming dimension that exists somewhere adjacent to the living world, the kind of place that does not invite pleasant comparisons. Hunson is an ancient, deathless demon of enormous power. He can consume souls. He can grow to monstrous size. He has existed since before recorded time, possibly since before the concept of time had anyone around to record it. He wears a family heirloom amulet that amplifies his chaotic, evil nature and enforces his role as the Nightosphere's governing force. He is, by nearly every measure, terrifying. He is also in the particular complicated way that Adventure Time tends to handle its villains, not entirely without love for his daughter. Just spectacularly bad at showing it, spectacularly bad at prioritizing her, spectacularly bad at being present when she needed him most. Her mother was named Elise. Human, ordinary in the most meaningful sense of the word, mortal, warm, anchored to the physical world in the way that only beings with a finite number of days ever truly are. How Elise and Hunson came together is not something the show fully explores, but the result of their union was Marceline. Half demon, half human. A child with pointed ears and pale grayish skin, and a nature that sat somewhere in the space between two worlds that were never meant to blend. She would discover in time that she had inherited certain things from her father. A capacity for consuming souls, for transforming her shape, for tapping into the deeper and darker currents of power that flow through the demonic. But in those early years, she was simply a child living in a trailer with her mother in a desert that had once been something else. A child trying to understand a world that was coming apart at the seams around her. Elise drew maps, told stories, made the small domestic acts of daily life into something that felt like shelter, even when the actual shelter was thin-walled and the world outside it was hostile. One of Marceline's earliest memories, as shown in the Distant Lands episode Obsidian, is of sitting with her mother as Elise describes how she met Marceline's father. There is warmth in the memory. There is love in Elise's face, even as she is clearly struggling with something she is not quite telling her daughter. Radiation sickness, the show implies, is slowly working through Elise's body. She contracted it from the fallout of the Mushroom War, from the poisoned air and the contaminated land. She knows she is sick. She does not tell Marceline. Instead, she draws a map, points to a location out in the desert, and calls it a secret clubhouse. Says there is a party happening there, tells her daughter to go find it when the time comes. She is, in the quiet way that parents sometimes do, trying to make sure her child has a destination when she is no longer there to provide one. What Marceline did not understand then, could not have understood, was that her mother was not going to make it to that clubhouse. That the illness was advancing faster than hope was keeping pace with. That the map was not a party invitation, but a goodbye letter written in the language of landmarks and directions. At some point, and the show is deliberately gentle about exactly how this happens, Elise stopped walking with Marceline and did not start again. She sent her daughter ahead, told her to go find the shelter. She turned back, or stopped, or was simply there one moment, and absent the next in the way that the very young and the very old, and anyone without the emotional vocabulary for death, tends to process loss. Marceline arrived at the shelter Elise had described to find its door open and the people inside long dead. The bunker had been there, just as the map promised. The party her mother hinted at had been real, once. But she was too late, or the world had moved on, or the shelter had not held against whatever the Mushroom War had released. She was alone. And here is the thing about Marceline that you need to carry with you through everything that follows. This wasn't the last time she would be left alone. This pattern of finding someone and losing them, of building something and watching it end, of reaching toward warmth only to find it gone, would repeat itself across her 1,000-year existence with a regularity that would crush someone less stubborn. But at the age of somewhere between 4 and 7 years old, standing in the ruins of what was supposed to be safety, she did not yet know that. She only knew the immediate, overwhelming weight of that particular moment. She was alone, and the world was ash, and her mother was not coming. There is a moment in Obsidian where young Marceline, walking through the desert with her mother, is given a map. Elise draws it by hand, carefully, labeling landmarks, tracing a path to the secret clubhouse she is describing. She is sick. The radiation sickness is already doing its work in her body. The invisible contamination of a war that ended months or years ago but left its residue in the water and the soil and the air and everything that touched those things. She is not telling Marceline this. She is drawing a map instead, because maps are solvable. Maps have destinations. Maps give a person a direction to face when direction is the only thing standing between them and collapse. Elise loved her daughter with the specific ferocity of a parent who knows her time is limited. This is something Marceline does not fully understand for a long time. What she understands in the immediate experience is that her mother is here and then her mother is not here. She is told to walk ahead. She does. She finds the shelter. It is empty and cold, and its previous inhabitants are past helping. And the person she was walking with, the one whose hand she had been holding, does not come. Marceline will believe, for the next 1,000 years, in some part of herself, she does not examine too closely that her mother left because of her. Because of the strangeness, the pointed ears, the pale skin, the indefinable wrongness of being a child with a demon's heritage, the sense that she was already something other than what the world expected, and that the world knew it. This belief, i.e., that she is fundamentally too much, too strange, too marked for loss to be accidental, shapes everything she becomes. Every wall she builds, every trickster performance she uses to keep people from getting too close. Every time she says she does not care when she obviously does. What keeps a child going after something like that? In the real world, we might say resilience or denial or the simple biological imperative that bodies keep moving even when hearts have stopped. Understanding why. In Marceline's case, I think it was something else. Something that would define her for the next 1,000 years and anchor her through every loss that came after. She kept making things. She kept creating. She was already drawing her own maps by then, already painting images of the places and people she knew, already finding in the act of making art and music a kind of weight-bearing structure for an interior life that kept threatening to collapse. Whatever she lost, she could render. Whatever she felt, she could transform into something with shape and sound. This was not merely a coping mechanism. It was, for Marceline, the fundamental mode through which she understood herself. And somewhere in the wreckage of that ruined world, she was about to meet the person who would become, for a while, the most important human being she had ever known. She was about to meet Simon Petrikov. Before you go further, if you want to keep up with more deep dives like this one, the kind that take their time and really sit with the stories that matter, go ahead and subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you are and what time it is where you are right now. There is something that feels right about knowing that people from all over the world are settling in and resting together while we walk through Marceline's story. Wherever you are welcome here. Part 2. The Wreckage of the World. Simon Petrikov had been an archaeologist, a scholar, the kind of person who spent his days cataloging the material remnants of lost civilizations, who found meaning in the careful excavation of the past, who believed that knowledge was worth preserving, and that history, properly understood, could tell you something true about what it meant to be alive. He had been, by all available evidence, a good man, a gentleman. Not without ordinary human failings. He was anxious and idealistic and perhaps a bit too in love with his own version of how things should go, but fundamentally oriented toward care, toward curiosity, toward the world as a place worth understanding rather than exploiting. He had a fiancée named Betty Groff. She was brilliant, maybe sharper than he was in certain ways, and the relationship between them was the particular kind of intellectual partnership that turns romantic without either person quite noticing the transition. They were building a life together. He found the crown in a Scandinavian dockworker's shop, bought it as a curiosity, put it on to make her laugh. The crown had very different ideas about what putting it on meant. It granted him power over ice and cold, the ability to freeze, to blast, to command the wintry elements with a word and a gesture. These are not small powers. These are the powers that, deployed in a ruined world full of things that want to hurt you, keep you alive when ordinary survival would be impossible. The crown's gift was genuine. It was just inseparable from its cost. The cost was Simon Petrikov's mind, his memory. The slow, grinding dissolution of the person he was into something the crown had its own agenda about creating. Betty saw what was happening and it frightened her. He could not blame her for leaving. He was already frightening himself, already watching the erosion from the inside with the particular horror of someone who understands exactly what is being lost and cannot stop it. She left, and the apocalypse happened, and Simon was alone in a ruined world with a crown that kept him alive, and was eating him for the privilege. He was wandering when he found Marceline. That much is clear. Not wandering in any particular direction. There were no particular directions anymore. No infrastructure to follow. No destinations that reliably rewarded getting to them. Just moving through the ruins of cities that had been built over centuries and were now, in the aftermath of whatever happened, reduced to architectural skeletons. Glass and steel, and the absence of the life that had inhabited both. He heard her before he saw her, crying in the way that small children cry when they have been crying for a long time already. And the crying has become less about expressing something acute and more about being the only thing left to do. He saw her through the rubble. Small, sitting alone, pointed ears, that pale grayish skin that marked her as something not entirely ordinary, whatever that distinction even meant in a world that was actively in the process of becoming something entirely new. He had found the crown in a dockworker's shop somewhere in Scandinavia, purchased it as a curiosity for his fiancée Betty Groff, and then made the catastrophic mistake of putting it on to make her laugh. The crown had very different ideas about what wearing it meant. It granted him power over ice and cold, wrapped him in the ability to freeze and blast and command the wintry elements. It also began, from that first moment of contact, eating his mind. By the time he found Marceline, 7 years old or thereabouts, alone in the post-war ruins, he had been wearing the crown on and off for some period of time, and the erosion was already underway. His fiancée Betty had left him, frightened by what the crown was doing to him. His former life was falling away. He was wandering the ruined world, trying to survive, trying to hold on to the person he had been, failing at both in degrees he was only slowly beginning to understand. He was 47 years old. She was somewhere between 6 and 8. In the show's most explicit depiction of their first encounter, in the 4th season episode I Remember You, we see him find her crying in the wreckage of a city. He walks toward her. He rummages in the ruins of a nearby toy store, a place that has been emptied and damaged and largely relieved of anything useful, but which still has the miscellaneous detritus of a commercial space recently occupied, and finds a stuffed bear. Old, a little battered, with the particular faded quality of toys that have been played with and loved and left behind. He brings it back and holds it out to her. She takes it. She stops crying. That bear was Hambo. And the fact that it takes an entire show and multiple spin-off specials to fully trace what Hambo means to Marceline is the most efficient argument anyone could make for the depth of her character. It is not just a toy, it is the moment of being found. It is the moment of someone choosing her when choosing her cost them nothing, and was therefore entirely free. Simon did not have to cross that street. He did not have to go into that toy store. He did not have to spend any of his dwindling emotional resources on a stranger child in a world where his own survival was not guaranteed. He did it because that was who he was, a man whose first instinct, upon encountering suffering, was to try to address it, even when he himself was suffering, even when he was already losing himself to the crown. Even then, Marceline would carry the memory of that moment for 1,000 years, would carry the physical embodiment of it in the form of that battered bear, through everything the world did to her after. And when the bear was taken from her, she would grieve it with the full grief of losing Simon himself, because in her internal architecture they had always been the same thing. The life they built together in the post-war wasteland was not comfortable or stable or reliable in any of the ways that normal childhoods are supposed to be. They ate what they could find. They slept where shelter was available. They moved when movement was necessary. The world around them was actively hostile. Mutated creatures, unstable environments, the accumulated toxicity of whatever the war had released, the simple fact of daily survival in a place not designed for it. And yet the show returns again and again to the warmth of the specific hours they spent together. The campfire meals, the stories, the games Simon invented to make the bleak seem manageable. He taught her to make the best of things, not in the saccharine way of someone who has not been through much, but in the practical, funny, sometimes absurdist way of a person who understands that the alternative to finding something to laugh at is breaking entirely. He would find a dead rat in a mailbox and suggest it as a traveling companion. He would hold a VHS tape up to the light and narrate the movie that did not exist in the tape that no player could play. He would act out the entire cast of Cheers through a broken television screen. He did these things because he was 47 years old and had once been a serious scholar and was now living in a post-apocalyptic ruin trying to keep a 7-year-old's spirits up, and humor was the only currency he had in surplus. Simon was not her father. He was not even, in the beginning, particularly set up to be her caretaker. He was a damaged man with a deteriorating mind, surviving day to day in a world that had no infrastructure and no safety, and very limited reasons for optimism. He was, by any practical measure, not in a position to take responsibility for a child. But he did. He chose to. And that choice, made in the rubble of the old world by a man who was already losing himself, was an act of love so quiet and so total that Adventure Time would spend years unpacking what it meant. The show's 5th season episode, Simon and Marcy, written by Rebecca Sugar and Cole Sanchez from a story by Patrick McHale, Kent Osborne, and Pendleton Ward, gives us what is probably the most complete single picture of their life together in the immediate post-war years. It takes place when Marceline is approximately 7 years old and Simon is 47, and it follows a single day in their wandering existence with a specificity and tenderness that makes the whole thing feel less like a cartoon episode and more like something that happened to real people. They are searching for food. The world around them is a wasteland of ruined buildings and overcast sky, the kind of nuclear winter atmosphere that follows the kind of event that leveled the civilization they were born into. At the edge of a forest, they find a mailbox. Simon checks it with a sort of exhausted optimism, hoping for something useful. There is only a dead rat inside. He makes a joke about it being a cute new traveling companion. Marceline, 7 years old and small and already carrying something far too heavy for her age, smiles despite herself. Simon finds a VHS tape on the ground. There is no VHS player. There is no electricity. He holds the tape up anyway and pretends to watch it, narrates what a boring movie it is, says the book was probably better. Marceline laughs. This is who he is in these moments. A man using everything he has left of his humanity to keep a frightened child from understanding the full weight of their situation. Making a game out of scarcity, finding the angle from which any moment can be made to seem, if not safe, then at least not without some small warmth. There is a rustling in the woods. Simon, protective, immediately puts the crown on. Marceline is visibly afraid of what the crown does to him. She has seen it before, watched its effects accumulate, watched the person she relies on become something stranger and less recognizable each time he uses it. Simon reassures her. He has to use it, he tells her. He has to keep her safe. He freezes a deer, which solves their food problem for the moment, and then takes the crown off. The effects linger longer this time than they did before. This is always how it works with the crown. Each use costs a little more than the last. That night, Simon makes a campfire. He cooks the deer. He sets up a broken television set and acts out an episode of the sitcom Cheers through the dead screen, voicing multiple characters, doing accents, doing his level best to reproduce something from the world they lost. Marceline plays along. She taps her soda can and says, "Mute," and Simon mouths words silently, playing the joke with her. She laughs. And then she coughs. A low fever, Simon realizes. She is sick. So Simon decides she needs chicken soup. It is a very human impulse in a very inhuman setting. The idea that soup will fix things, that there is something you can do, that you are not helpless, even when helplessness is the most accurate description of your situation. He finds out there is a soup shop in a town they passed recently. He does not want Marceline to walk all that way. He finds an abandoned motorcycle, loses control of it immediately, and they bail out just before it crashes into a wall and explodes. Not deterred, he finds a wheeled chair and pushes her all the way into town. This is the kind of detail that Adventure Time builds characters from. Not grand gestures, not heroic battles, but the image of a 47-year-old former archaeologist pushing a sick child across a post-apocalyptic wasteland in an office chair, determined to find her soup. It is absurd and tender and utterly human, and it tells you more about who Simon is than any amount of dramatic set piece ever could. The soup shop is not just a soup shop when they get there. It has become inhabited by creatures, mutated, slime-oozing post-war monsters who react to noise and movement and are not interested in negotiating. Simon puts Marceline in an abandoned car to keep her safe. Then a horde of the creatures appears at the end of the alley. He is trapped. He does not have enough ordinary human capability to deal with what is in front of him. He reaches for the crown. And here's the thing about the Cheers theme song. The song Simon had sung to entertain Marceline. The song from that old sitcom. The song about a bar, where everybody knows your name and they are always glad you came. Simon begins singing it to himself as he puts the crown on. Not because he has forgotten what he is doing, but because he is trying to maintain himself, trying to keep the voice of Simon Petrikov dominant over the noise the crown makes in his mind. He sings it to stay sane. He sings it the way you hold your breath when you are underwater. Not because it helps you breathe, but because it focuses you on the act of surviving the moment. He blasts the creatures with ice. He saves the day. He finds the soup. The chicken soup falls from a pink sentient substance clinging to a wall, which the show will later establish as an early, primitive form of what eventually becomes Princess Bubblegum, the Candy Kingdom, the whole sugary civilization that grows in the aftermath of the Mushroom War. But in this moment, it is just a mysterious kindness from an unlikely source. He brings the soup back. He feeds it to Marceline. She tells him she loves him. She hugs him. Simon says, "I love you too, Gunter." Not Marcy, not Marceline. Gunter. A name he has not yet met anyone by. A name the crown has pulled out of some other place in his deteriorating mind. A penguin's name, eventually. The first sign, in this moment that was going so well, that the crown is further along in its work than Simon wants to admit. Part 3. Where everybody knows your name. The crown took Simon Petrikov apart piece by piece. This is important to understand not just as a plot point, but as a lived experience. And Adventure Time makes sure you feel it rather than simply registering it intellectually. It was not fast. It was not sudden. It was the slow withdrawal of a person from inside their own life, the gradual graying out of memories and personality and attachment, replaced by the crown's particular obsessive madness. Simon did not become the Ice King overnight. He became him over years, maybe decades, maybe longer. In increments so small that any individual change could almost be explained away as stress or exhaustion, or the particular demands of surviving in a ruined world. He would put the crown on to fight off a threat and take it off and feel slightly less like himself, and would reason that this was just the aftermath of using something powerful, that he would recover, that the real Simon was still there and would reassert himself. He was right, for a while. And then he was less right, and then the intervals of lucidity shortened until they were not enough to be called intervals at all. Think about what it means to watch yourself disappear while still being present enough to notice. To feel the name Marceline becoming unfamiliar in your mouth, even as you understand, abstractly, that it is important. To write letters warning her about what you are becoming, and then lose the capacity to deliver them. Simon Petrikov was an archaeologist. He understood, better than most, what it meant to lose the record of something. He understood that the object might survive even when the civilization was gone. He was trying to leave Marceline an object. A record. The letters were his equivalent of burying a time capsule in the wreckage, his attempt to leave something of himself in a form that might be found after the excavation. He wrote to tell her he loved her. He wrote to explain that the magic was the only thing keeping him alive, that the alternative to using the crown was dying in the first hard winter after the war, and that he had not chosen survival as an act of abandonment, but because surviving had seemed, at the time, like it might allow him to keep taking care of her. He wrote to say he was afraid of what he was becoming. He wrote to apologize in advance for anything he might do under the crown's influence. He wrote to ask her to understand. He could not give her the letters. This is the part that never fully stops hurting, even 1,000 years later. By the time the letters were finished and the feelings were complete, and everything he needed to say was on paper, he was already too far gone to navigate the simple act of putting them in her hands. The lucid Simon who wrote them could compose. The crown-consumed Simon who remained could not deliver. The letters went into the scrapbooks. The scrapbooks went into the Ice Kingdom that accumulated around the Ice King he became. And Marceline spent the next several hundred years not knowing those letters existed, not knowing that the person she loved had tried to explain himself, not knowing that the silence was not indifference but incapacity. This is why the episode I Remember You hits the way it does. Because Marceline has spent centuries interpreting Simon's departure as abandonment, softened slightly by the understanding that the crown was responsible, but still felt as loss. Still felt as being left. Still felt as the recurring pattern of her life, where people who loved her eventually stopped being able to stay. And then she is sitting in her house with a man who is Simon and is not Simon. A man who has found letters he wrote and does not understand what they say, who is offering them to her as potential song lyrics. And she reads them. And she understands for the first time the full truth of it. He tried. He tried as hard as it was possible for someone in his position to try. He left because he was afraid of hurting her. He left not because he had stopped loving her, but because the love was still there and he was terrified of what he might do when there was not enough of him left to protect her from himself. For Marceline Bodaya, who has been carrying the weight of that particular interpretation for such a long time, this is enormous. It does not solve everything. It does not restore what was lost. But it changes the structure of the grief, and sometimes that is what you need. Not for the wound to close entirely, but for the shape of it to become comprehensible, for the scar to make sense. The crown kept going, of course. It did not care about the emotional truth of what was happening to the people around it. It just kept doing what it did, the slow, cold, grinding excavation of Simon Petrikov and the installation of the Ice King in his place. The obsessive princess fixation, the grandiose delusions, the childlike emotional register combined with an ancient power to create something simultaneously pathetic and dangerous. The crown was a machine for doing this, and it was very good at its work. And Marceline watched it, across however many years it took. Watched the person who sang Cheers to keep himself sane become the person who sang the Fry song wearing a wig, made to look like her hair, not knowing who Marceline actually was or why he had any particular feeling about her songs. Watched Simon become someone who kept finding her, again and again, because even the crown could not fully erase the pull between them, just the understanding of what that pull meant. This is what the show means by its mental illness metaphor. Not that the Ice King is a clinical study, but that the experience of loving someone with dementia, of watching the person you know disappear while the body remains, of being drawn to someone who is always almost who you need them to be. That experience has a particular quality that Simon and Marcy and I Remember You render with unusual accuracy. The person is there. The love is there on both sides, in the wordless way that even the Ice King's magnetism toward Marceline demonstrates. But the bridge between them is gone and you cannot build it again from just one side. She moved constantly in this period. Every time the Ice King found her, drawn to her by the ghost of Simon's attachment, not knowing why he cared so much about a specific vampire with dark hair and a tendency toward guitar-based expression of her feelings, she would relocate. Because being found by him was too much. Because seeing the face she loved wearing the eyes that did not know her was a specific and recurring agony that she had not developed a way to absorb without it costing her something she could not easily recover. The Cheers theme was easier when she was the one singing it to stay sane, rather than watching him sing it as a punchline, with no idea that he had sung it first in a ruined alley to keep himself present enough to protect her. But Marceline watched every increment. Think about what that means. Think about sitting with someone as they forget your name, as they forget why you matter to them, as the face you know, the one you associate with safety, with being found, with that moment in the ruins when someone chose to stay, slowly gets replaced by something that wears the same skin, but is not quite the same person anymore. Think about the way grief compounds when the person you are grieving is still right in front of you, still asking you things, still reaching for you, still technically present, just not quite there, not quite in the way that counts. The show calls this a fantasy metaphor for dementia, and the people who made it are not subtle about the comparison. A novelist named Lev Grossman, speaking to NPR about the episode Simon and Marcy, said that watching Simon's deterioration affected him deeply because his own father was going through Alzheimer's. He found the emotional logic of it deeply accurate, painfully so. The crown strips away memory. It replaces the person's interior life with obsessive fixation. It leaves the body behind after the mind has been evacuated, and the body keeps reaching for the things it used to love without any longer knowing why. Simon knew what was happening. This is perhaps the most devastating element of his story. He was a scholar. He was an intelligent, observant person who had studied the effects of magical objects on historical wielders, and he could see with increasing clarity what the crown was doing to him. He wrote letters. He wrote letters to Marceline trying to explain, trying to apologize in advance for whatever the crown-consumed version of himself would do when the real Simon Petrikov was no longer available to make choices. He wrote to tell her that the magic was keeping him alive, that without the crown's power he would have died in the first hard winter after the Mushroom War. That survival had required this cost even as the cost kept accumulating. He wrote to tell her he did not want to leave her, that he was afraid of what he was becoming, that he hoped, somehow, she would be okay when he was gone. He could not give her the letters. That is the part that breaks. By the time the letters were written, by the time his mind was clear enough to have composed them, he was also far enough gone that he could not navigate the act of delivering them. The letters went into the scrapbooks. The scrapbooks went into the Ice Kingdom that grew up around the Ice King he became. And Marceline spent the next several hundred years not knowing those letters existed. The specific moment when Simon knew it was time to step back is captured in the Everything Stays sequence from the Stakes miniseries. A sequence drawn to accompany a song written by Rebecca Sugar and performed by her in the voice of Elise, Marceline's mother. Simon, already deeply transformed, already more Ice King than Simon in his moments of crisis, arranges for someone else to take care of Marceline. He tells her in one of his lucid stretches that he has made arrangements, that she will be looked after, that he has to go because he is becoming something that might hurt her, and the one thing his diminishing self can still clearly prioritize is her safety over his presence. He leaves. Marceline waits, the way children wait when they have been told something will happen and trusted the person who told them. Then she waits the way people wait when they are starting to suspect that the thing they were waiting for is not coming. Then she stops waiting and starts surviving on her own, which is a different thing entirely and much harder. Hunson Abadir, her actual father, re-entered her life somewhere in this period. The show establishes through Marcy and Hunson that it was Hunson who took over her care after Simon left, and the contrast could not be more acute. Simon had been present, attentive, willing to push an office chair across a wasteland to find her soup. Hunson was the Lord of Evil, ruler of a soul-consuming dimension, perpetually distracted by the business of being a chaotic, demonic force in the universe. He was not cruel to her exactly. He simply had no real framework for what a child needed, no capacity for the sustained, ordinary attention that is what parenting actually requires. He cared about her in some abstract, distant way that never quite translated into being there when she needed someone to actually be there. There is a memory from this period that Finn accidentally witnesses in the episode Memory of a Memory, when he and Jake enter Marceline's mindscape looking for something else entirely. A young Marceline sitting at a table in what looks like an abandoned bistro with a basket of French fries. Hunson appears, and then Hunson eats her fries. Not because he is cruel, not because he is making a point, just because they were there and he was not thinking about her, which is in some ways worse than cruelty. Cruelty at least implies you are paying attention. Marceline, young and raw and already carrying years' worth of accumulated loss, looked at her empty basket and felt the full weight of what that single thoughtless act meant. He did not think about her. He did not notice her. She was not in the hierarchy of his concerns, something he could consistently hold in mind long enough to act as if she mattered. She wrote a song about it, because that is what Marceline does with pain. She transmutes it. The Fry song, as it became known, is one of the gentlest expressions of devastating emotional truth that Adventure Time ever produced. On its surface, it is about French fries. Underneath, it is about a child asking the oldest and most unanswerable question that children of absent parents have always asked: Sol, why did you leave me? You created me. Do you not want to see me? Do I not matter enough to stay? It takes the mundane, almost absurd vehicle of stolen fast food and uses it to carry something much heavier. The specific grief of being loved insufficiently by someone who is supposed to love you enough. This became one of the most important emotional artifacts in Marceline's life. Not just as an expression of pain, but as the thing that would eventually, much later, crack open the wall between her and her father and let something more honest through. But that comes later. For now, it was simply a song. A young girl with a bass guitar and 1,000 years of living still ahead of her, singing about fries. And somewhere out there in the expanding ruins of the old world, a man who used to be Simon Petrikov was wandering, wearing a crown, slowly becoming someone else. Still, on some deep level beneath the madness. Looking for her? Still in the inarticulate way that the Ice King always gravitates toward Marceline despite not knowing why, drawn in her direction. The magnet of what they had to each other, not quite erased. Even as everything else was. Part 4. The Vampire Slayer. Time passed in the land of years. Decades. The exact chronology of Marceline's life between losing Simon and becoming a vampire is something the show sketches rather than fully maps. But the broad shape of it is clear enough. She grew up. Or she aged into something like adulthood while carrying the interior weight of all those years of early loss. She survived first in her father's unsatisfying company, and then increasingly on her own, learning the rules of the post-war world as it slowly transformed from rubble into something new. Magic was rising. Creatures were emerging. The land that had once been an ordinary human Earth was becoming the land of stranger, wilder, more densely weird than anything the old world had contained. As if the Mushroom War had cracked something open and the stuff that poured out was simultaneously terrible and extraordinary. There is something important about this period that the show implies rather than states directly. The first several hundred years of Marceline's life before she became a vampire are a long process of figuring out who she is in the absence of the people who helped her understand herself. Her mother was gone. Simon was gone in the way that is worse than gone. Her father was present in the intermittent, unreliable way he had always been. She had no model for what she was supposed to become. She had a demon heritage that gave her power she was still learning, and a human heritage that gave her a capacity for grief that no demon power could address. What she built in this gap was herself. Not the finished version. No one ever arrives at a finished version. But the architecture that she would inhabit for the next 1,000 years. The independence, the music, the art on cave walls, and any other surface that held still long enough. The habit of making things from what she was feeling. Of transmuting the interior into the exterior, of finding in the act of creation a way to survive an emotional climate that would otherwise be uninhabitable. She also built, very deliberately, a certain kind of toughness, not the brittle toughness of someone who is shut down. Marceline is never shut down, not fully. She is always feeling everything, always carrying the full weight, but the toughness of someone who has learned to keep moving under that weight. To not stop. To not ask for help until asking is the only option left. To project an exterior of chaotic, cheerful, slightly menacing fun. Because if people are busy being entertained by your performance, they are not asking about the parts underneath that you have not figured out how to share. Marceline became a vampire hunter in her mid to late teens. This is established in the Adventures Time 2015 Spooktacular, and then detailed much more fully in the Stakes miniseries. She was not recruited. She was not trained. She simply discovered that she was effective at it, that the demon heritage she carried gave her a natural advantage over creatures who were formidable opponents for humans, that she could fight them and survive and absorb their particular gifts through the soul-eating ability she had inherited from Hunson. And she found that having a purpose, a clear and immediate purpose with real stakes, was something she had been missing since the post-war years with Simon. Hunting vampires meant she was useful. Not abstractly useful, not useful in the distant, bureaucratic way of ruling the nightosphere that her father kept suggesting she aspire to, but immediately, specifically, personally useful, to people who would otherwise die. This mattered to her. She had been the person who needed protecting once. She had been the small child in the ruins who needed someone to cross a street and give her something to hold. Being able to be that person for others, to put herself between the vulnerable and the predatory, was not just a job. It was a reckoning with what she had received and could now pay forward. The stakes flashbacks in the miniseries show her working her way through the vampire hierarchy with a thoroughness that is partly about effectiveness and partly about something more personal. Each vampire she hunts represents something she is processing. Each encounter with an immortal predator is also, in some way, an encounter with herself, with what she might become if she let the darker aspects of her heritage run the show. She kills them. She takes their essences and their abilities into herself through her father's gift. She adds their power to her own. The Fool gave her levitation, the easy, casual relationship with gravity that would become one of her most characteristic qualities, the ability to drift and float and approach the world from slightly above it, as if she has never been entirely committed to remaining fully grounded. The Empress gave her invisibility, the capacity to disappear from sight, when disappearing was the more useful choice. The Hierophant gave her shape-shifting, the ability to transform into bats and wolves, and other forms that served different purposes in different moments. The Moon gave her self-healing, a regenerative power so complete that serious injury became merely inconvenient rather than potentially fatal. Each of these abilities is also, if you want to read the symbolism, a quality of her inner life made external. She floats because she is never quite fully anchored to the place she is. She can make herself invisible because she has spent much of her life doing exactly that emotionally. She changes shape because she is always in some process of becoming something. She heals because she has had to, repeatedly, and has gotten very good at it. She found the human tribe eventually, those people with the animal hats. What struck me, reading through the details of that section of stakes, is how completely the music moment defines the encounter. To Bread. Tom plays a guitar for the remaining members of his group, a small act of ordinary human comfort in an extraordinary circumstance. The impulse to make something beautiful, even when everything practical argues against spending energy that way. Marceline hears it from concealment, and she does not announce herself. She does not try to communicate through words, which would require negotiating the distance of her strangeness. She plays the same song. This is the most Marceline thing she could possibly do. She speaks in music. She makes contact through the medium that does not require her to be anything other than what she is, that cannot carry deception or performance, that goes directly from one person's interior to another's. She was not trying to convince them to trust her. She was simply being present in the only way she knew how to be fully present, through sound, through something made, through the generosity of sharing a song. They let her in, and she protected them with everything she had, which was considerable. The story of Marceline the Vampire Slayer is the story of someone who found, in the worst circumstances imaginable, the thing that made her feel most like herself. Not because it was comfortable or safe or easy, but because it was honest. She was good at this. She was doing something that mattered. She was not alone. This part of her history is detailed in the 2015 miniseries Stakes, which across 8 episodes provides the most thorough single excavation of Marceline's past that the show ever undertook. The Stakes backstory is set in the post-war world, before U had properly established itself, in a time when the surviving human population was scattered and vulnerable and being preyed upon by vampires, ancient, powerful creatures who had apparently survived the Mushroom War considerably better than most of the softer, more fragile beings around them. Vampires in Adventure Time are not the angsty romantic figures of a lot of popular mythology. They are predators, plain and simple. They operate in hierarchies. They feed on blood. They are, in this particular period of history, a genuine existential threat to the remnants of human civilization, because there are few enough humans left that a population of active vampire predators could realistically wipe them out entirely. Marceline discovered that she had been killing vampires, naturally, intuitively, the way some people discover a talent for a sport or a language, before she fully understood what she was doing. Her demon heritage gave her advantages over them: strength, speed, durability, and, crucially, the ability to absorb the souls of those she killed, and in doing so, inherit their particular powers. The Fool, whose power was levitation. The Empress, who could turn invisible and had a particular, terrifying, hypnotic gaze. The Hierophant, an old-school vampire with a rigid code of rules and weaknesses. He could not enter a dwelling uninvited, and crossing that threshold uninvited reduced him to dust and bones. The Moon, whose self-healing power was borderline absolute. Each of them she hunted, each of them she staked, and from each of them she took, through the demon heritage her father never really explained to her, a power she could use. She was not doing this abstractly. She was not a professional monster hunter operating through some kind of supernatural infrastructure. She was doing it because she had found people to protect. There is a group of humans in the Stakes flashbacks who wear animal hats, specifically to protect against vampire bites on the neck, a practical solution to a very specific threat. They are survivors, small in number, wary of strangers, especially strangers with pointed ears and pale skin and fangs. When Marceline first finds them, they are afraid of her, reasonably so because she is demonstrably something other than ordinary human, and other than ordinary human had been, in this period of the world, predominantly bad news. What changes their minds is music. Two Bread Tom, one of the group's members, sits down with a guitar and plays for the small cluster of remaining humans, a quiet act of ordinary human comfort in the middle of extraordinary danger. Marceline hears it from behind a bush. And instead of announcing herself or approaching or doing anything that might have been rational, she sits down where she is and begins playing the same song. Just matching him. Just being in the same musical space, separated by a bush and the distance of everything that makes her different from them, but playing together. They figure out she is there. And something in that act of musical solidarity, the willingness to share a song rather than demand something or take something, shifts how they see her. They let her in. They let her help. She becomes their guardian, their vampire-killing edge against the creatures that have been hunting them, and they become the closest thing she has had to a community since Simon left. She protects them with everything she has, which means eventually that she faces the Vampire King. He was the apex predator of his kind. Large, animalistic in appearance, not humanoid in the polished way of some vampires, but genuinely lion-like, rough-featured, powerful. He was the one who had built the vampire hierarchy that was threatening the remaining human population. He was also, in the odd way that Adventure Time tends to humanize its creatures, not entirely without his own perspective. He had simply survived the same apocalypse everyone else survived, and was doing what apex predators do when the normal structure of the world collapses, expanding into the vacuum. The human tribe was repairing a boat when the Vampire King and his remaining forces attacked. Marceline defended them as they escaped onto the water. She fought the Vampire King at the shore, exhausted and injured, and running low on whatever reserves she had been operating on. She staked him through the heart. She won. But just before he went down, he bit her. Not an accident, not a last desperate strike in the way of a dying creature lashing out. He bit her deliberately, with intention, a final act that was equal parts vengeance and species preservation, an attempt to continue what he was even as he ended. He bit her, and the vampiric essence entered her blood, and the last surviving vampire hunter became the last surviving vampire. Marceline did not die. Her demon heritage prevented the transformation from completing in the way it would have for a fully human host. Instead, she became something hybrid, something the show calls a vampiric demon human, which is as accurate a description as any. She retained her demon powers. She gained the accumulated vampire powers she had absorbed from the Fool and the Empress, and the Hierophant and the Moon. She gained the Vampire King's own abilities on top of those, and she became immortal. Truly, permanently, not going anywhere immortal. She also became something the sunlight could hurt. Something that needed to drink the color red to sustain herself. Not blood specifically, because blood is red, but the color itself, in any form it takes. Strawberries, ketchup, red candy, a raspberry popsicle. The redness was what she consumed, and whatever object it came from was left colorless. drained of its particular hue. She was over 1,000 years from dying of old age now. She was strong and fast and capable, and in possession of more powers than she had started with. She was also alone again. The humans she had protected had sailed away. The vampires were gone. The thing she had been doing, the purpose she had organized herself around, was complete. And she was standing on a shoreline in a world that was slowly becoming something different than anything she had known, with a life stretching out ahead of her that would never naturally end, and no particular map for how to fill it. Part 5. The Music in the Glass Kingdom. Let us talk for a moment about Princess Bubblegum, because Marceline's story does not fully make sense without her. Bonnable Bubblegum, or Princess Bubblegum, or PB, or just Bonnie to the people she is closest to, is not human. She was formed from the Mother Gum, a vast sentient mass of bubblegum that grew in the ruins of a city in the years after the Mushroom War. The show gives us a glimpse of this in Simon and Marcy. The pink substance that smiles at Simon and provides him with the chicken soup he is looking for is an early, inchoate form of the same entity that would eventually, through centuries of growth and expansion and self-organization, become Princess Bubblegum and the Candy Kingdom. She is both very old and surprisingly young, in the way that any being who grew from something more elemental than a childhood tends to be. She has been making candy people, building infrastructure, establishing governance and science, and the whole elaborate project of the Candy Kingdom for a very long time. She is brilliant. She is obsessive. She finds comfort in systems and control and the satisfaction of having anticipated a problem before it arrives. She is also, under the layer of royal composure and scientific rigor, someone who has had to build herself almost from scratch, who does not entirely trust that the world is safe enough to let her guard down, because the evidence for that trust has historically been mixed. The thing about Bubblegum is that she does not process the way most people do. She processes by working, by making, by building things and solving problems and producing outcomes that are measurable. When she is scared, she runs an experiment. When she is hurt, she improves a formula. When she is in love, she funnels the energy into the Candy Kingdom's infrastructure and does not examine what she is doing or why. This is not stupidity. This is the particular defense mechanism of someone who learned very early that feeling things too directly was a luxury she could not afford. She is made of sugar, and she runs a kingdom, and she has to be the person who holds everything together. And so she has become very good at holding everything together, and not so good at anything that requires her to put it down. Marceline met her somewhere in the centuries between becoming a vampire and the show's present day. The exact meeting is not depicted, which is a choice the show makes with intention. Some things are more interesting when you only get their echoes. What we have instead is the accumulated evidence of what happened. The rock shirt, the glass kingdom, the songs that contain the bones of a relationship that was once much closer than the show's early seasons suggest. The rock shirt is the center of this early history. It is a battered, faded thing with the look of a garment that has been worn too many times to count, the kind of shirt that accumulates personality rather than wearing it. And it appears in the Season 3 episode What Was Missing as Princess Bubblegum's most treasured possession. The Doorlord's magic goes right for it. Bubblegum is embarrassed when it comes out. Marceline recognizes it immediately, and the recognition passes between them like a current for just a moment, before both of them retreat behind their respective walls and pretend they were not, just then, standing that close to something they usually keep carefully managed. In Obsidian, we see where the shirt came from. A young Bubblegum at one of Marceline's shows. Marceline wearing it, playing in the particular throes of early career music making, when everything still felt like it could be anything. At the height of the set, she pulls the shirt off and throws it into the crowd. It lands on Bubblegum, who blushes. Who, in that moment, becomes someone who will keep this specific object for the next several hundred years through multiple kingdoms and wars and the general entropy of a post-apocalyptic world, because it was Marceline's and it landed on her, and that felt like something. That is where they started. With a shirt thrown into a crowd, with a blush. What followed is the natural, complicated trajectory of two extraordinary people who recognized each other and could not quite figure out what to do with the recognition. They were drawn together with the specific gravity of people who fill each other's gaps. Bubblegum's rigidity and Marceline's chaos, Bubblegum's relentless future orientation and Marceline's 1,000 years of past, Bubblegum's need for control and Marceline's celebration of everything that cannot be controlled. Two halves of a complete perspective on being alive. If only they could learn to hold their own half without trying to make the other person become the same half they were. They were good together, for a while. Good in the particular way that relationships are good when both people are still discovering what the other person is. When everything is still novel and the friction that will later need to be worked through has not yet accumulated into something that requires navigation. Marceline was probably more open then than she would become later. She had not yet lost enough subsequent to Simon to have fully calcified the distance she used as protection. And Bubblegum, in those early centuries before the weight of the Candy Kingdom was fully settled on her shoulders, was probably more present than she would become. The Glass Kingdom breakup is the story of what happens when two people who love each other stop being able to hold both their love and their limitations simultaneously. Something in their dynamic had been building toward a confrontation, and the dragon Multilarvo provided the context for it. Marceline sealed the dragon with music. This is how she seals most things, not through force or strategy, but through the raw, honest expression of what she is actually feeling, which in this period of her life was the characteristic combination of anger and grief and defensive fury that characterizes someone who is hurting, but refuses to show the hurt directly. Her punk rock in these years was primarily constructed from pain she was not ready to name. The Glass Kingdom's dragon responded to the force of her authenticity. The music worked. And then they had the fight. The specific content of the fight is given to us in fragments and inferences rather than directly shown, which is actually more devastating because it asks the audience to fill in from their own experience of relationships that went wrong for reasons that were not really about what they appeared to be about. Bubblegum was too controlling. Marceline was too chaotic. Bubblegum was too wrapped up in her own importance to every situation. Marceline was too committed to the posture of not caring about anything enough to fight for it. They were speaking at each other across the gap of their fundamental differences, and neither of them had yet developed the vocabulary or the patience to actually bridge it. The song Woke Up, Marceline's breakup anthem, composed in the present day of Obsidian, catalogs all of this with the particular precision of someone who has had centuries to understand exactly what went wrong. Bubblegum's intellectual haughtiness, the way she makes every room she enters into a problem she needs to solve, every relationship into a system she needs to optimize. The gap between her stated values and the experience of being on the receiving end of her management. Marceline is ruthless in the song and honest, and underneath the ruthlessness, there is grief so old it has composted into something nearly indistinguishable from acceptance. She sang the breakup song. The dragon responded to its fury and its pain. The Glass Kingdom, unfortunately, needed containment, not separation, and the song succeeded at driving the dragon back temporarily, but not at solving the underlying problem. The crack in the containment remained. Centuries later, it would reopen and require them to return together to fix it properly. But for now, it was enough to provide an excuse for Marceline to leave. She left. And Bubblegum kept the shirt. The shirt. Kept it for hundreds of years. Wore it to sleep in. There is nothing logically necessary about this. She could have given it away, or simply lost it in the ordinary attrition of centuries, or made any of a dozen rational decisions about a piece of old clothing. But she kept it because it was the last physical evidence of the version of herself that had been willing to blush at a concert and feel something without immediately managing it. Because letting go of the shirt would have required admitting that the feeling it represented was truly gone, and she was not prepared to admit that. Some things are kept not because they are useful, but because they are true. She is both very old and surprisingly young in the way that any being who grew from something more elemental than a childhood tends to be. She has been making candy people, building infrastructure, establishing governance and science, and the whole elaborate project of the Candy Kingdom for a very long time. She is brilliant, she is obsessive, she finds comfort in systems and control and the satisfaction of having anticipated a problem before it arrives. She is also under the layer of royal composure and scientific rigor, someone who has had to build herself almost from scratch, who does not entirely trust that the world is safe enough to let her guard down because the evidence for that trust has historically been mixed. Marceline met her at some point several hundred years before the show's present day. The exact circumstances are not spelled out, but the emotional shape of how it went is very clear. They were drawn to each other. Opposite in almost every surface way, Bubblegum all pink and structured and deliberate, Marceline dark and loose and determinedly chaotic, and yet somehow fitting together in the particular way that people who are secretly working on the same problems from different angles sometimes do. Bubblegum was building a civilization and trying to control everything. Marceline was avoiding attachment and trying to feel nothing too deeply. Both of them were, in their very different ways, working around the same wound. Both of them had learned, in the hard school of loss, that caring too much was dangerous. What the Distant Lands episode Obsidian reveals through a series of beautifully constructed flashbacks is the arc of their early relationship. A young Bubblegum attending one of Marceline's concerts. Marceline wearing a rock shirt, a faded, battered thing that had clearly been through some things, and throwing it into the crowd at the height of the performance where it landed on Bubblegum. Who blushed? Who kept it? Who wore it to bed for the next several centuries because it was Marceline's? And even when things between them went wrong, even when years passed without contact, Bubblegum could not make herself get rid of the shirt. Because things did go wrong. The two of them went to the Glass Kingdom together. The Glass Kingdom is exactly what it sounds like. A civilization of glass people, fragile and beautiful and structurally precarious, living in towers and houses of crystallized silica, valuing transparency and integrity, and the particular aesthetic of seeing clearly through things. There was a dragon called Molto Larvo, and it was threatening the Glass Kingdom, and Marceline dealt with it the way Marceline deals with most things, through music. Through the raw, angular, deliberately aggressive punk rock energy that she had developed over centuries of having a lot of feelings and no safe place to put them. She played the dragon down. She subdued it through sound. The Glass Kingdom celebrated. Everyone was grateful, and then Marceline and Bubblegum had a fight. The details are in the song Woke Up, which Marceline writes in the present day of Obsidian, and which functions as both a breakup anthem and an archaeological dig through the frustrations that have been building for years. Bubblegum's intellectual haughtiness, her emotional distance, the way she treats every problem as a system to be optimized rather than a feeling to be sat with. Her tendency to position herself as the necessary center of any situation, the one who understands things most clearly, the one whose judgment should be trusted most completely. Marceline, who had been through enough to know that certainty was a luxury and control was an illusion, could not sustain a relationship built on those terms. Bubblegum, for her part, had her own version of this story. She was building something she believed in. She was carrying responsibility for an entire kingdom. She did not have the luxury of being a wandering, free-spirited vampire queen who could blow off obligations whenever they became inconvenient. She was trying to do something that mattered, and it required everything she had. They were both right. They were also both wrong. And neither of them, in this particular moment, had developed the emotional capacity to sit with that complexity without turning it into a rupture. Marceline sang a song. It was not a love song. It was a goodbye song. And the dragon, which had been driven away by the love and rage and authenticity of her punk music, responded not to the fury but to the grief underneath it. The old wound in Marceline's sound. The centuries of loss. The door slammed and the stillness after. They broke up. Or whatever the friendship version of breaking up is, they separated. They put distance between themselves. And the Glass Kingdom was left with its dragon problem unresolved because the song that had worked was the authentic one. And authenticity cannot be manufactured for a second performance. Centuries would pass. The distance would grow, and yet, and this is the detail that says everything about both of them. Bubblegum kept the shirt. Part 6. Evicted and then made a friend. The Marceline that Finn and Jake meet in the first season of Adventure Time, in the episode helpfully titled Evicted, is not yet the character she will become over the course of the series. She is still, in some real sense, the version of herself that she built to survive. The trickster, the person who creates distance by making everything a game, who tests people by putting them through mild chaos, who guards the interior by keeping the exterior in constant motion. She evicts Finn and Jake from their house. This is the first thing she does in the series. She shows up at their tree fort, where Finn has been living with Jake for years, and informs them that the property technically belongs to her, which is true in the complicated ownership framework of the land of Oo, where very old beings have prior claim to a lot of real estate simply by virtue of having been around when it was first settled. She is not mean about it. She is cheerful and chaotic and completely unbothered by the inconvenience she is causing. She turns the whole thing into a game, which is to say she deals with any potential emotional friction by making it not emotional. Finn, being Finn, finds this irresistible. Not the eviction. That is inconvenient, but the quality of the person doing it. There is something about Marceline that draws him. She is old in a way that nothing else in his experience has been old. She carries centuries of something he cannot identify, and underneath the performance of careless fun, there is a gravity to her that he can feel even if he cannot name it. Finn is 13 and has most of his depth still ahead of him, but he has very good instincts, and his instincts tell him that this person is worth knowing, even when knowing her comes with regular inconvenience. She tests him constantly. This is Marceline's fundamental mode with new people. The extended audition, the ongoing assessment of whether someone is actually worth the risk of caring about. She scares Jay, who has a deep and entirely reasonable vampire phobia, purely for the entertainment value. She makes situations complicated when they could be simpler. She takes the chaotic option when the straightforward one is available. All of this is, in the framework of who she is, a prolonged interrogation. Will you keep coming back? When I am difficult, when I am strange, when I am more work than you expected, will you stay? Will you choose to stay not because you have to, but because you want to? Finn keeps coming back. Every time. With his particular quality of genuine enthusiasm that is very hard to exhaust, he keeps showing up. Not naively, he is not unaware that she is testing him, but because he genuinely wants to be her friend and has not yet learned to be strategic about wanting things. He wants what he wants, and he pursues it directly, which Marceline, who has been managing people from a safe distance for centuries, finds simultaneously exasperating and deeply touching. The moment she really lets him in is the music moment. She invites him over to help record a song, just to hold the recording device while she plays and sings. It is a very simple ask, practically. It is a very large ask in terms of what it reveals about her. Because the song she is recording is the Fry song, and the Fry song is the thing she has been carrying since before she became a vampire, since the years when Hunson Abadir was the parent she had, and he was demonstrating, through the simple act of eating her fries without thinking, what she was worth to him. She is letting Finn hear the actual wound. She is not explaining it. She is not contextualizing it. She is just singing it and letting him be present for it, and trusting that he will not do something terrible with that trust. He does something well-intentioned but disastrous. He summons Hunson Abadir from the Nightosphere. The logic of this is 13-year-old logic at its most earnest and most catastrophic. If the problem is that her dad does not understand how she feels, and she has a song that expresses exactly how she feels, and her dad is findable via a magical ritual, then clearly the solution is to get her dad and play him the song. Finn has no capacity to conceptualize why this is a terrible idea. He does not understand what the Nightosphere is or what its ruler does in his spare time, or why the phrase ruler of a soul-consuming hell dimension might be relevant context for deciding whether to magically drag someone into a situation. Hunson arrives and does what Hunson does. He eats souls. He takes the axe bass, his family heirloom, he notes, which he gave her, which she has been playing for however long she has had it, which does not seem to have registered with him as making it hers. He grows enormous. He becomes a problem that requires Finn and Marceline to work together across a wide swath of the land of Oo. But then Finn plays the recording. Hunson hears his daughter's voice. He hears the Fry song, the actual words of it, The simple, devastating question underneath the joke structure of its subject matter. Did you ever love me? Did you see me? Does it matter to you that I existed in your proximity and you did not notice? The Lord of Evil listens. And something underneath the chaos, something that the show will develop over subsequent seasons, into a relationship both more complicated and more real than this first encounter, responds. He says he loves her. He says he is sorry for the fries. He adds, in the way of someone who has never really developed a good understanding of when to stop talking, that they were not even very good fries. They were really cold. Which is, simultaneously, an acknowledgement and a demonstration of exactly why the acknowledgement does not fully land. He loves her. He also cannot help himself from qualifying the love with commentary. This is Hunsan Abadir. This is also a very particular and recognizable dynamic between parents and children who love each other deeply and communicate at cross purposes constantly. Finn sends him back to the nightosphere before the moment can devolve further. Marceline is briefly angry at Finn for the chaos he created. Then she admits she is relieved her father is gone. Then she keeps not talking about how she feels, because she has a lot of practice at that and it is genuinely easier in the immediate term. But something has been established. Finn knows about the Fry song now. He has been inside the recording of her feelings and he did not flinch. He used it, badly, to cause a catastrophe, yes, but the intent was care, even when the execution was chaos. And Marceline can work with that. She has always been better with imperfect care than with indifference. The series traces the slow and genuine evolution of their friendship with real care over the following seasons. Marceline does not suddenly become warm and available. The transformation is gradual, layered, occasionally interrupted by setbacks that reactivate old patterns of distance. But the trajectory is unmistakably towards something more open, toward a version of herself that does not need to manage every encounter, toward trusting that Finn, who has proven repeatedly that he is not going anywhere, is actually safe enough to be real with. There is a lovely quality to how Finn relates to Marceline as they get older in the series. He sees her as her own person in a way that not everyone manages. He does not reduce her to her history or her powers or her role in the world. He just knows her. In the simple way of genuine friendship, shows up to help, asks how she is and means it, makes her laugh with his own brand of blundering earnestness, is, in the most uncomplicated way, her friend. Which sounds small. It is not small. After 1,000 years, having someone be simply, reliably, uncomplicated your friend is one of the best things in the world. And then there is Ash, who is the anti-Finn in almost every way that matters. Ash was Marceline's ex-boyfriend. Immortal wizard. The kind of person who is charming in the immediate term and terrible in the sustained one, who has the social skills to make a good impression and the values to squander what that impression buys him. He and Marceline had been together for what the show implies was a significant stretch of time, had been building something that functioned. And then he sold Hambo to Maya the Sky Witch in exchange for a cherry blossom wand. He traded the irreplaceable thing for a trinket. He traded the object that was Simon's gift, that had traveled with Marceline across 1,000 years of the worst things the world had to offer. That was the last physical artifact of the most important relationship of her childhood, and he traded it to a witch for a wand that did a party trick. The scale of this mismatch is not accidental. The show is not suggesting that Ash sold Hambo for something slightly less valuable. It is saying that Ash sold Hambo for something that had no real value at all, because he did not understand what Hambo meant, because he had not actually been paying attention to who Marceline was. She broke up with him. He could not accept it. His response to being broken up with was to disguise himself, trick Finn and Jake into entering Marceline's mind, and destroy the memory of their breakup so she would not remember having done it. This is not just wrong. It is a violation so specific and so personal, going into someone's mind and taking away their own history, that it functions as a kind of thematic encapsulation of everything the relationship had been doing wrong all along. Ash was never interested in Marceline the person. He was interested in Marceline the prize, the beautiful 1,000-year-old vampire queen, and he was prepared to erase whoever she actually was if her actual self became an obstacle to what he wanted. When Finn figures out what happened, shows her his own memory of witnessing the breakup. The look on Marceline's face when she realizes what Ash did is very specific. Not just angry, something quieter than angry. Something that recognizes, with a clarity that is not pleasant, how close she came to not knowing what happened to her own past, her own choices. She walks out of the house, and she, Finn, and Jake give him a thorough and entirely deserved beating. There is something cathartic about it that the show frames simply without editorial commentary. Some things are that simple. Some people deserve the consequence. What follows in the episode Sky Witch is the Hambo retrieval, Marceline and Bubblegum, together, tracking down Maya to get the bear back. And what Maya requires in exchange is the rock shirt. The shirt Bubblegum has kept all this time. The shirt she wears to bed. She does not hesitate. She gives it without being asked twice, without making Marceline feel the weight of the sacrifice. Just, here, take it. Hambo is more important. You are more important. This is the moment where Marceline begins to understand that the ice between her and Bubblegum is not inevitable. That there is something still there, something that survived the Glass Kingdom fight and the centuries of distance. Something that expressed itself in the keeping of a shirt and the willingness to give it up when something mattered more. Something that cannot be accounted for by simple friendship, though it operates as friendship in the ways that are available to it. She does not act on this understanding immediately. Neither does Bubblegum. They are both very old and very practiced at not acting on things immediately. But the understanding is there, and it shifts the ground slightly between them. And sometimes a slight shift in the ground is the beginning of something that eventually moves mountains. The series traces the slow and genuine evolution of their friendship with real care. Marceline does not suddenly become warm and available. She tests Finn constantly, because testing is how she learned to gauge whether someone is worth trusting. She shows up at his house with pranks. She scares J.A., who has a deep and entirely reasonable vampire phobia, purely for the entertainment value. She plays the role of antagonist just long enough to figure out whether Finn will keep coming back even when she is difficult. He does. He always does. He has the particular quality of genuine enthusiasm that is very hard to manipulate and even harder to exhaust. And Marceline, who has known so much exhaustion in her 1,000 years, finds it quietly extraordinary. She invites him to help her record a song one afternoon. This is significant. Music is Marceline's interior space, the place where the actual Marceline lives, as opposed to the performance she puts on for the world. Inviting someone in to hear it is an act of trust, even when she dresses it up as casual. The song she is recording is the Fry song. Finn, who is 13 years old and emotionally intuitive in the blunt way of very earnest people, listens to the song about her father eating her fries and decides that the obvious solution to this problem is to go get her dad. He performs the Latin incantation required to summon Hunson Abadir from the Nightosphere. He does not consult Marceline about this plan. He means well. Hunson arrives immediately and becomes a problem. He tries to eat Finn's soul. He steals Marceline's axe bass, which is a family heirloom, as he notes with the kind of proprietary ease that entirely ignores the fact that he gave it to her, which means she gets to decide what to do with it. He wanders the land of Ooh, eating souls, growing enormous, becoming an active emergency. Finn and Marceline chase him across Ooh. They try to stop him. He is difficult to stop because he is the Lord of Evil, and Lord of Evil is not a ceremonial title. What breaks through is the song. Finn plays back the recording of the Fry song. Marceline's voice, her instrument, her pain rendered small and true through her own medium. Hunson hears it. And something in him, some circuit that is not connected to the soul-eating amulet or the chaotic evil imperative, responds to the sound of his daughter's actual feelings. He understands, in that moment, why she is upset. He apologizes. He says he loves her. The moment is brief. Finn takes the opportunity to send him back to the Nightosphere before it can get complicated. But it is real. The wall between them cracks, just slightly, in the way that walls crack when the right weight is applied in the right place. What Marceline takes from it is not resolution, exactly. Hudson is still who he is. He still does not fully understand her. He still prioritizes his agenda over her comfort, will still, in subsequent episodes, try to trick her into taking over the Nightosphere by telling her an amulet will grant her wishes rather than turn her into a demonic overlord. The reconciliation between Marceline and her father is a long project, not a single moment. But she knows now that he hurt her, and that is somewhere to start. The relationship with Finn deepens over the course of the series in the quiet way that real friendships deepen, not through a single defining scene, but through the accumulation of time spent together, of things faced together, of the small transactions of care and attention that build trust between people. Finn becomes one of the few people Marceline will let see her undefended. Not all the way. Not without the habit of deflection getting in the way sometimes. But enough. Enough for him to be someone she calls when she needs help, and to be someone she shows up for when he does. There is also the matter of Ash. Ash was Marceline's ex-boyfriend, immortal wizard. Terrible person, in the particular way of people who are charming enough to get away with their terribleness for longer than they should. The show reveals their history through Memory of a Memory, an episode in which Finn and Jake, tricked into entering Marceline's mind by Ash in disguise, believing they are helping her wake from an eternal sleep spell, wander through her memories and inadvertently piece together the trajectory of a relationship that went very wrong. They had lived together in the treehouse. There is a sweetness in the early memory of it. Two young-looking immortal beings in the early flush of something that felt like belonging, setting up house in a tree. Ash was charming and funny and could do magical things with flowers. Marceline was sharp and creative and trying in the way she sometimes tried when she allowed herself to trust that something good could last. It didn't. Ash was careless with her in the slow, grinding way of people who take for granted what they have. He sold Hambo, her stuffed bear, Simon's gift to her in the ruins of the old world, the object she had carried across the whole 1,000 years of her life as the last physical remnant of the person who had been most fully her father, to a sky witch named Maya, in exchange for a cherry blossom wand, a toy, effectively. He gave away the irreplaceable thing she had for a magical trinket. Marceline broke up with him. Of course she broke up with him. He had taken the one thing that connected her to Simon, to the ruins, to the terrified small girl she had been, before she had to learn to be tough, and treated it as available for trade. Ash's response to this was to disguise himself as a wizard, manipulate Finn and Jake into entering Marceline's mind, and destroy the memory of their breakup so she would not remember having done it. When Finn figures out what happened and shows Marceline his own memory of witnessing the breakup, she remembers. She walks out of Ash's house, and then she, Finn, and Jake give him the most justified beating in the show's history. The Hambo story does not end there. It continues in the episode Sky Witch, where Marceline and Princess Bubblegum team up to retrieve Hambo from Maya, who purchased it not for sentimentality, but because the object's emotional charge, the accumulated weight of everything it had meant to Marceline across hundreds of years, made it a supernaturally powerful artifact. The only thing with enough emotional force to trade for it, as it turns out, is the rock shirt that Marceline gave Bubblegum. The shirt Bubblegum has kept all this time. The shirt she wears to bed. Bubblegum trades the shirt for Hambo without hesitating, which says everything, quietly, about how much she still feels for Marceline even when they are not speaking, even when years have passed, even when there is every reason to have let the attachment go. Marceline gets Hambo back. She gets the one remaining physical link to Simon back, and she and Bubblegum are, after this, on tentatively warmer terms. Something has been re-established, something that was never entirely gone. Part 7. I Remember You. There is an episode of Adventure Time called I Remember You. It aired in October 2012. It is 4 seasons into the show, at a point when the audience knew Marceline well and had some idea of her history with Simon, but had not yet seen the full extent of what that history contained. The episode begins in the Ice Kingdom. The Ice King has dressed himself in a wig that looks like Marceline's hair. He is performing a cover of the Fry song, changing the words so they are about Gunter, his penguin companion, because that is the version that made sense to him. He sings it for Gunter, who stares at him with the patient incomprehension of a penguin being addressed in terms that do not quite apply. The Ice King thinks this is good material. He thinks Marceline's songs are very good and wants some of that energy for himself. He decides he is going to go to Marceline's house and ask her to help him write a song. This is the kind of moment that Adventure Time does so well in its middle seasons. The joke that is genuinely funny and simultaneously contains within itself the anatomy of a tragedy. The Ice King wearing Marceline's hair and singing her song about her absent father without any understanding of why that song exists is, from the outside, absurd. It is the kind of absurdity the show built its early reputation on. But underneath it, barely hidden, is the reality. Simon Petrikov was the person that song reached toward. Simon Petrikov was the one who knew why the fries mattered. Simon Petrikov's last remaining accessible impulse, expressed through the Ice King's undirected obsession with Marceline's music, is to keep engaging with her even when engagement means wearing a wig and not knowing why. He shows up at her house with a drum kit and an omnichord. She tells him to leave. He sets up anyway, with the cheerful obliviousness of the Ice King in full flight, immune to the social signals that a person with his mental architecture simply cannot process. He has pages, receipts, takeout menus, newspaper clippings, pieces of paper he has been writing words on. He thinks they are lyrics. He has been writing them down because they seemed important, seemed like they should go somewhere, seemed like the beginning of something. And he has no idea why they feel that way because the person who wrote them to express something specific is not available from inside his current mind to explain. Marceline goes through the pages because she does not know what else to do with the chaos he has brought into her house. She reads. She finds scraps and fragments that do not immediately mean anything. And then she finds something that does. The letter, or a page of the letter. The words that Simon Petrikov, somewhere in the last stretch of his lucidity, wrote to the small child he had been taking care of in the ruins of the world. Written for her. Left where it would be found eventually by the version of her that would one day be old enough to understand it and need to hear it. Marceline, is it just you and me in the wreckage of the world? That must be so confusing for a little girl. The words are simple. They are not attempting poetry. They are the words of someone who is afraid and is trying to be honest about the fear while simultaneously reassuring the person he is writing to. The words carry the specific quality of someone writing something they do not expect to be able to say out loud, trying to create an artifact of their feelings that will survive them. She reads the rest of it, the magic keeping him alive while making him crazy, the need to save her. The fear that by the time she reads this, the person who wrote it will be gone in all the ways that matter. He hoped she would be okay. He hoped she would understand why he had to do what he did. He loved her. The Ice King is still there, bustling around with his drums, absolutely delighted to have a collaborator, absolutely unable to understand the expression on Marceline's face as she reads these words for the first time. And Marceline, who has spent 1,000 years being the one who holds things together, who transmutes pain into music, who does not break down in front of people if she can avoid it, begins to cry. She does not stop the Ice King from picking up his drumsticks. She does not stop the music from starting. Instead, she starts to sing. She sings the letter. She sings Simon's words in the only way she knows how to process, something too large for regular speech. She makes it into a song. She makes it into something with shape and structure and sonic weight. She gives it the form that will let her survive encountering it. The Ice King plays. He is loud. He is not in time. His drumming has the characteristic chaotic quality of someone who has forgotten what rhythm sounds like, but has not forgotten that rhythm is supposed to be there somewhere. He joins in with his own voice. Flat, cheerful, entirely wrong for the gravity of the moment. He has no idea what he is participating in. He has no idea that the words he is singing are words addressed to the person sitting next to him, written by the person he used to be, meant to cross 1,000 years of separation and loss and arrive right here, right now, in this moment. Outside the house, Finn and Jake are watching through the window. They do not understand what they are seeing. It is bewildering and sad, and they have no context for any of it. Jake asks what is going on. Finn says he has no idea. And then the episode cuts backward. The ruins. A city destroyed. Small Marceline sitting in the rubble, crying. The camera finding her from a distance through the gray overcast light of the post-war sky. And Simon walking toward her, picking his way through the debris, going into the toy store. Finding Hambo on a shelf, the bear with the faded fur and the kind face still somehow findable in all that wreckage. Bringing it back across the street. Holding it out. She takes it. She looks up. She stops crying. The song continues over the cut, Marceline's voice breaking slightly at the high notes. The Ice King's drumming, chaotic and somehow in its chaos, fitting. Because this is what it is. This is what it has always been. This is the wreckage, and the two of them are in it together, and neither of them entirely knows that. Here is what the episode does that is genuinely rare in storytelling of any kind. It takes a character the audience had written off as a punchline, the Ice King, this bumbling, absurdist villain who kidnaps princesses and lives with penguins and has been a figure of mild ridicule since the show's first episode, and retroactively fills him with tragedy so complete that it recontextualizes everything that came before. Not by changing anything, not by asking the audience to forget the joke, but by placing the joke inside a larger truth and letting the combination of both be simultaneously funny and devastating in the way that only the most honest storytelling manages. The Ice King is still ridiculous. He is also Simon Petrikov, who gave a stuffed bear to a crying child in a ruined city, and who wrote letters he could not deliver, and who loved this person so completely that even 1,000 years of magical amnesia could not stop him from gravitating toward her. Both things are true. Both things are happening in the same episode, in the same room. And holding both of them at once, the absurdity and the grief, is exactly what the show has always been asking its audience to do. Marceline understands all of this now. She has the letter. She knows why he left. She knows it was not because he did not love her, but because he loved her so specifically and so carefully that he was afraid of what the Crown's version of him might do. She knows that Simon Petrikov, who sang Cheers in a ruined alley to stay sane, thought of her right up until he was not himself enough to think of her anymore. She knows she is not forgotten, and tomorrow, as she always does, she will get up and keep going. Because that is what you do when you have the answers, and the answers do not change the loss. You sit with the weight of what you now understand, and then you get up. The Ice King decides he wants to write a song with Marceline. He shows up at her house with a drum kit and an omnicord and a collection of scraps he has been saving, receipts, takeout menus, newspaper clippings, pages torn from old scrapbooks. He has been writing lyrics on all of it. He thinks they are good material for a song. Marceline does not want him there. She never particularly wants the Ice King at her house. Every visit is a reminder of what she is missing. The Simon inside the Ice King, gone from access but not entirely gone, showing up at her door with the face she knows and the voice she knows, and none of the memory that would make it bearable. She tells him to leave. He doesn't. He starts setting up his drums. He plays badly. He sings worse. And then he hands her a piece of paper with words on it, and she reads the words, and the words are Simon's. Marceline, is it just you and me in the wreckage of the world? That must be so confusing for a little girl. And I know you're going to need me here with you, but I'm losing myself, and I'm afraid you're going to lose me too. It is a letter. One of the letters Simon wrote when he was still himself enough to write, when he was still lucid enough to understand what was happening and what it would mean. The Ice King has no idea what it says. He thinks it is lyrics. He thinks it is a great start to a song. He has been carrying Simon's letters around in his scrapbooks all this time without any comprehension of what they are. Because the person who wrote them is not available from inside the Ice King's current mental architecture to explain. Marceline reads it in silence for a moment. Then she begins to cry. And then, because this is who she is and music is how she processes the unprocessable, she begins to sing. The Ice King, oblivious and happy, plays along. He bangs his drums. He sings his own version of the words, flat and arrhythmic and ill-fitted to the gravity of the moment, completely unaware of what he is singing. His playing is chaotic. His voice is wrong. None of that matters. Marceline sings Simon's words, his apology, his explanation, his grief about what he was losing, and his love for her that survived even as everything else was taken. And she weeps as she sings, and the Ice King drums along, and outside the house, Finn and Jake are watching through the window and do not understand anything they are seeing. Then the episode cuts to a flashback, a post-war cityscape. Ruins. Small Marceline sitting alone in the rubble, crying. Simon walks toward her from across the street. He goes into a ruined toy store. He finds Hambo on a shelf, still somehow intact, still somehow findable among all the things the war destroyed. He brings it back to her. She takes it. She looks up at him. She stops crying. That is the last image. The show ends there, on that moment, on the kindness of a stranger in a ruined world, choosing to help a child he did not know, choosing to give her something to hold. There is a reason this episode is considered by many people to be not just one of the best episodes of Adventure Time, but one of the best episodes of animated television ever made. It does something very difficult. It takes a joke character, the Ice King, who for several seasons was primarily a bumbling, vaguely pathetic antagonist, and retroactively fills him with enormous tragedy. It does this not by changing anything about him, but by providing context. The Ice King is not less ridiculous for having been Simon Petrikov. He is more heartbreaking. The ridiculousness is now legible as what happens when a person is stripped of their memory and identity and left with only obsession and need and the ghost of feelings they cannot account for. For Marceline, the episode is the moment when she finds Simon's letters and understands, at last, why he left. Why the person she loved was kind enough to write down an apology he knew he would not be able to deliver in person. Why Simon Petrikov, who had every reason in the world to simply endure his own disintegration and be angry at the universe, instead spent his last lucid moments trying to make sure she would be okay. She spends the next day or so more quietly than usual. Then she goes on, because that is what Marceline does. Part 8, Stakes. The undead past returns. For 1,000 years, Marceline had been a vampire. For 1,000 years, she had simply accepted what the Vampire King's bite had made her. Immortal, powerful, dependent on the color red, unable to walk in direct sunlight without pain and eventual dissolution. She had built a life inside those constraints. She had come to know the shape of what she was. But the beginning of Season 7 finds her in a different place than she has occupied before. Tired-minded, in a way that is not physical. The kind of tired that comes from being a certain thing for a very long time and beginning to wonder, not whether it is worth continuing, but whether the particular shape of your existence has to be exactly this shape forever. She is over 1,000 years old. She has watched generations of beings live entire lives and pass away while she remained. She has loved people and buried them. She has kept going with the patient stubbornness of someone who does not exactly know what stopping would even look like. There is a particular quality to immortality that Adventure Time does not shy away from. It is not merely living longer. It is experiencing the passage of time differently. It is watching the things you love change and end while you remain constant. It is the accumulation of losses that does not stop because you do not stop. Every ordinary mortal being who matters to you will grow old, will change, will die, and you will still be there exactly as you were, which is another way of saying you will be progressively more alone in the specific way of someone whose memories no one else shares. Marceline has been managing this for a long time. She has the paintings on the cave walls to prove it, hundreds of years of accumulated visual record, the faces and places and moments she would otherwise be the only one remembering. She has her music. She has her stubborn refusal to become inaccessible to others, despite everything that recommends inaccessibility as a strategy. She has been managing. But she decides she wants to try being mortal. She wants to feel finite again. She wants to stop being the last vampire in the land of Ooh and start being something more ordinary. She does not fully know what she is asking for, in the sense that anyone who has only ever known one thing cannot fully know what the alternative feels like. But she knows she wants it. She goes to Princess Bubblegum. Their relationship has been rebuilding slowly over the years. The Sky Witch and Hambo incident was a turning point, and subsequent episodes have shown them on warmer terms, more openly friendly, no longer entirely managing the space between them, with the studied care of people who are not sure how close to stand. Bubblegum, who is the most scientifically capable being in O, is the right person to ask about something this technically complex. Bubblegum listens, studies the problem, develops a procedure. She extracts the vampiric essence from Marceline through a scientific process, drawing out the concentrated supernatural energy that has been woven through Marceline's biology for centuries. Without it, Marceline is mortal, half demon still. She retains her demonic powers, her shape-shifting, her connection to her father's heritage, but no longer vampire, no longer immortal. The aging that was paused resumes. The sunlight is simply sunlight. She goes outside, she walks into the light. And the show gives her a moment, a quiet, simple, character-defining moment of just standing there, feeling it, feeling the warmth on skin that has not felt warmth from sunlight in a very long time. It is extremely short-lived. Peppermint Butler, assisting with the procedure, knocks over the container of stored vampiric essence. It spills. It escapes. 5 reconstituted vampires emerge from the escaped essence. The essences Marceline absorbed all those centuries ago when she was killing them one by one to protect the remaining humans, given shape and consciousness again by the accident of their release. The Fool, the Empress, the Hierophant, the Moon, the Vampire King. What follows across the 8 episodes of Stakes is, structurally, a vampire hunt, the same activity Marceline once organized her existence around, now run in reverse, tracking down the 5 vampires who have reawakened and returned to a land of Oo that has moved on without them. Except it is also much more than that, because each vampire represents a different chapter of who Marceline was. Fighting them is not just fighting external threats, it is fighting the past. It is going back through the history she was trying to move on from and looking at all of it in the face. The Fool is first and is relatively straightforward, but the Empress raises the stakes immediately. The Empress, with her hypnotic power and her invisibility, has gone directly for the Ice King. She has some history with him, or rather with Simon, from before the war, and she is using the Ice King's susceptibility to hypnotic suggestion to bend him toward her purposes. This requires Marceline to protect the Ice King, which means spending extended time with someone who is simultaneously the person she loves most in the world, and the person who is the most painful reminder of what she has lost. She has to care for the shell of Simon while fighting a creature from her own past. The emotional architecture of this is not gentle. The Hierophant is strange and deeply unsettling in a different way. He is old-fashioned, an adherent of a code of conduct for vampires that predates the Mushroom War, formal and rule-bound in a way that makes him almost more comprehensible than he might otherwise be, even as he is terrifying. He cannot enter a house uninvited, which is a weakness the show exploits with a particular elegance. Marceline knocks him over so that he falls across a threshold uninvited, and he disintegrates into dust. But before this happens, he says something that lingers, that there is a price Marceline has not yet paid for the powers she carries, a price that has been accumulating across centuries. That the full life she traded for immortality is not merely an abstraction, that its absence has shaped everything about who she became and how she experiences being herself. This is not a threat, it is information, and Marceline does not want it. The Moon is probably the most quietly devastating of the 5. Her power is near absolute self-healing. Regeneration so complete that ordinary damage simply is not sufficient. Fighting her requires going somewhere else entirely, finding a vulnerability that the healing cannot address. But what the Moon represents, in the thematic architecture of Stakes, is the question of whether you can be hurt enough times by the same loss to stop healing from it. Whether at some point, the regeneration simply does not come back. By the time Marceline reaches the Vampire King, she has been fighting her own history across 4 adversaries. She is depleted in ways that have nothing to do with physical damage. She is carrying the weight of everything she has been revisiting. Her post-war years, her choices, the cost of the life she built. The question of whether who she is now is worth being. The Vampire King is the culmination of all this, and she is not sure she has enough left to face him. She stops. She sits down in the middle of the fight. She cannot make herself continue. The show calls this what it is. Depression. Not dramatic breakdown, not villainous despair, but the simple, terrifying, flat calm of someone who has run out of reasons to keep going in a given moment. Marceline, who has survived everything, who has kept moving for 1,000 years, hits a wall that her considerable stubbornness cannot get through because the wall is not external. It is internal. It is the accumulated weight of everything Stakes has been bringing to the surface. The Ice King sits down next to her. He tells her she is being a coward. He tells her to get up. This is Simon talking. Not Simon by name, not Simon with awareness, but the deep structural care that Simon had for Marceline, the part of him that would push through his own fear and limitations to take care of her, expressed in the only language available to the person currently occupying his body. The Ice King cannot say, "I love you, Marcy, please get up." He can say you are being a coward in that particular obtuse way that is somehow coming from him both wrong and exactly right. She gets up. The final battle requires her to absorb the Vampire King's essence back into herself, to take the power that was extracted and reclaim it, to become the Vampire Queen again in order to have the capacity to contain something that cannot otherwise be contained. She is bitten a second time in the process. She becomes vampire again, permanently, the moment of mortality that she sought now definitively ended. The song that closes Stakes is Everything Stays, written by Rebecca Sugar, and performed in the voice of Elise, Marceline's mother, the woman who drew maps and kept secrets and loved her daughter to the edge of her capacity to survive. The song is quiet. It is small. It is about the fact that things change and also stay the same simultaneously. That the world keeps shifting and transforming and becoming something different while also always being, in some deep structural way, what it was. Leaves turn from green to gold. But they're still leaves. The river bends, but it's still the river. Everything stays. Everything keeps changing. Marceline is a vampire again, but she is not the vampire she was at the start of Stakes. She is someone who has looked at the whole history and kept going anyway. Someone who has faced the 5 oldest and most formidable parts of her past and chosen to keep being herself. Someone who, for possibly the first time, is at peace with being what she is. She is the Vampire Queen, and for the first time in a long time, she does not wish she were something else. She goes to Princess Bubblegum. They are on better terms now. The Sky Witch incident, the return of Hambo, the slow thaw that followed years of careful mutual circling. Bubblegum is not just her friend now. She is the most scientifically sophisticated being in the land of Ooh, and if anyone can figure out how to reverse the vampiric condition, it is her. Bubblegum can do it. She extracts the vampiric essence from Marceline through a scientific process, drawing out the concentrated supernatural energy that has been part of Marceline's biology for centuries. Without it, Marceline is mortal. Half-demon, still. She retains her demonic powers, her shape-shifting, her connection to her father's heritage, but no longer vampire. She is aging again. She is finite again. She can walk into sunlight. The procedure works. And then the stored essence, which Bubblegum has been containing in careful isolation, is accidentally spilled by Peppermint Butler. 5 vampires reconstitute themselves from the escaped essence. The Fool, the Empress, the Hierophant, the Moon, the Vampire King. The 5 vampires whose souls Marceline absorbed when she was a vampire slayer in the post-war world, whose powers became hers, are back, and they are exactly as dangerous as they were the first time. This is where Stakes spends most of its 8 episodes, in the double track of the present-day vampire hunt and the past-time flashbacks that fill in the gaps of Marceline's history. Each vampire represents a different chapter of who she was, a different confrontation with the powers she carries and the life she chose. Fighting them again means fighting the past again. It means having to revisit the years when she was the last defender of a dwindling human population, when the choices she made were genuinely life or death, and the cost of getting it wrong was not hers alone to pay. The Fool is relatively straightforward, the first to be restaked, the least powerful of the group. But the others bring complications. The Empress, with her invisibility and her hypnotic gaze, has a particular relationship with the Ice King that becomes relevant when it is revealed she has been hunting him. This requires Marceline to protect the Ice King, which means spending time with someone she has complicated feelings about, even in his current diminished state, caring for the shell of someone she loves. The Hierophant is deeply strange. Old school, rule-bound, defined by the elaborate code of vampire conduct that existed before the Mushroom War. He has a conversation with Marceline that is more negotiation than fight. And it is during this exchange that the show raises the idea that becoming a vampire carries a price. That the full life Marceline traded for her immortality was not just a metaphor, but a genuine transaction. And that the absence of it has shaped everything about who she became. By the time Marceline reaches the Vampire King, she is depleted in ways both physical and emotional. She has been fighting her own history. She has been reminded repeatedly of what she lost and what she chose and what those choices cost. She has been trying to do something that feels impossible, defeat a version of the past that she has been living in for so long it has become a part of her structure. And then, mid-battle, she loses the will to keep going. It is a real moment of depression. The show frames it directly and does not soften it. Marceline, who has survived the Mushroom War and Simon's loss and her mother's death and Ash's betrayal and 1,000 years of everything else, sits down in the middle of a fight and cannot make herself continue. The exhaustion is total. The grief is total. She cannot remember, in this moment, why any of it matters. What breaks through is the Ice King, who sits down next to her, who, in his own chaotic and not quite right way, tells her that giving up would be cowardly, that she should get up, that people need her. Simon, trapped in the Ice King, speaking to Marceline the way Simon would have spoken to her. Not because he remembers, but because some part of the care he had for her is so deep in the structure of who he was that even the crown could not entirely erase it. She gets up. She reabsorbs the Vampire King's essence, taking it back inside herself. This means becoming a vampire again. The Vampire King's power is too great and too complex to be destroyed or stored safely, and the only vessel that can contain it is Marceline. She is bitten a second time in the process. She becomes the Vampire Queen again, but she is different from how she was before stakes. The process of facing the 5 vampires, of revisiting the original choices, of sitting with the full weight of what she traded and why, has done something clarifying. She is not finished with herself in the way she was when she arrived at Bubblegum's lab asking to be cured. She is something more settled, something more at peace with the particular shape of her existence. She sings Everything Stays, the haunting, quiet Rebecca Sugar song that runs over the final episode of Stakes. Everything stays right where you left it. Everything stays, but it still changes. The world is not static. The past does not disappear. It just keeps changing form, keeps being what it was in different configurations, keeps being findable if you know where to look. She is a 1,000-year-old vampire, and she has just gone through something that no one else in the world has gone through, and she is going to be okay. She is finally okay. Part 9. Reunions and Reconciliations. The 8th season of Adventure Time contains, hidden inside a stretch of episodes that are doing a lot of different things, one of the most quietly devastating moments in Marceline's arc. It starts a few seasons back, in the episode called Betty. Simon Petrikov reemerges. Not the Ice King. Simon. Truly Simon himself returned to his original mind because the magical being Bella Noche has temporarily stripped all magic from the Wizard City area, which includes the Ice King's crown. Without the crown's magic, there is no Ice King. There is just Simon, a human being who has been gone for a very long time, suddenly present in a body he mostly recognizes, in a world that is nothing like the one he left. He calls Marceline. Think about what that phone call must have been. She knows what has happened. She knows Simon resurfaces briefly when the magic is stripped. And when she hears his voice, the real voice, Simon's voice without the Ice King layered over it, the voice she has been hearing filtered through the wrong person for the better part of 1,000 years, she faints. She just drops. The relief is too complete for her body to hold upright. The grief that has been present in every interaction with the Ice King, the grief of almost but not quite, of close but not close enough, is released all at once by hearing him, and there is no elegant way to hold that. Simon, for his part, has approximately as much time as the magic stays stripped to do what he needs to do. He is trying to find Betty, his fiancée, the woman who left because of the crown's influence on him, who has been gone across all the centuries that the crown was running his life, and who is findable through a specific kind of time portal that requires a very specific kind of emotional anchor. The anchor is Hambo. Marceline has Hambo. She got it back at considerable cost because it connected her to Simon. And now Simon, briefly himself, needs it to reach Betty. She gives it to him. Of course she gives it to him. There is no version of this where she weighs the options and decides not to. He is standing there, real and present, and himself, asking her for the one thing that matters to him most, and she loves him. She has always loved him. The bear was just the shape the love took when there was nothing else to hold. He uses Hambo to open the portal. Betty comes through. Simon and Betty have their reunion. Brief, rushed, incomplete, in the way that all rushed reunions are incomplete. And then the magic restores and the crown reasserts, and Simon slides back behind the Ice King's eyes, and the window closes. Marceline watches this happen. She has just given away the last physical remnant of her childhood to make this moment possible, and the moment was real, but it was not long enough. And Simon and she barely had time to say anything to each other before he was gone again. This is, in the extended chronicle of Marceline's losses, a particularly precise kind of knife. She got him back for an hour. She gave up Hambo for that hour, and then she had to watch him disappear again. The show handles this with restraint. It does not linger on her grief. It does not make her cry or break down in any visible way. She is 1,000-year-old Marceline, who has been doing this longer than anyone else alive, and she handles it the way she handles most things. She keeps going. But you can feel the cost of it in the space around her, and what the episode does not show, in the particular quality of the silence that follows. Season 8's Broke His Crown is a partial answer to this. It is a strange and specific episode structured around Bubblegum and Marceline going inside the crown's interior magical architecture, visualized as an elaborate labyrinthine space full of all the crown's accumulated history and magic, to fix something that Betty, in an earlier episode, altered in a way that has been making the Ice King increasingly unstable. It is technical, it is weird. It is also, beneath its mechanics, a love story in miniature. Inside the crown's labyrinth, they find Simon. Projection, not the real person. A mental echo of who Simon Petrikov was and is, preserved inside the structure that has been running on his consciousness for 1,000 years. But the projection is clear, coherent, himself in the ways that matter. He helps them fix what needs fixing. He is glad to see them, in the particular way of someone who has been locked inside something and is briefly, accidentally visible through a window. He apologizes to Marceline. For Betty, for spending his brief window of real lucidity on trying to find her, rather than catching up with the person who had been waiting for him for so much longer. He says she is important. He says it inadequately, probably, because Simon Petrikov has never been good at saying the important things cleanly. That is not his failing. It is just the limitation of being a person, of trying to fit things too large into the container of language. But he says it. Marceline tells him it is fine. She is not performing forgiveness. She actually means it, in the way that you can mean something and also feel the ongoing loss of the thing you are forgiving. She understands why he made the choices he made. She always has, more or less. What she has wanted was not for him to have made different choices, but for there to have been more time in which more choices were possible. Before they leave the crown's interior, she says she wants to come back. Wants to visit Simon in there again. Bubblegum tells her the reprogramming will prevent that. The show does not give Marceline a response to this. It just gives her a moment. The camera on her face, The quiet of someone absorbing another small loss in the long series of small and large losses that constitutes existing for 1,000 years. And then varmints. This is the episode where everything between Marceline and Bubblegum shifts for good. Bubblegum has just been voted out of the Candy Kingdom. King of Ooh, a con artist in royal clothing, has won an election through manipulation and charm, and Bubblegum's own failure to remain accessible to the people she governs. She is alone for the first time in a very long time, without the structure that has defined her for centuries, without the title and the responsibilities and the context within which she has been most fully herself. She is just Bonnie, out here in the regular world, not knowing what to do with her hands. She calls Marceline, not Finn, not Jake, not any of the other people in her considerable orbit. Marceline, they chase varmints through the pumpkin patch. They end up in the old crystal mines below what used to be the Candy Kingdom, a place they once knew together, a place that carries the sediment of everything they were to each other before the Glass Kingdom. And in the mines, Bubblegum cries. She does not want to. She has very little practice at it, has spent centuries being the person who does not need comforting, who manages rather than feels. But the accumulated pressure of everything, the election, the exile, the years of carrying the Candy Kingdom alone, the loneliness that she has been too busy and too proud to name, finds its way out in the dark of the mines with only Marceline there to see it. Marceline does not fix it. She does not try to. She is not Bubblegum. She does not reach for the solution. She just stays. She sits with it. She is present in the way that the best presence is, not demanding anything, not requiring the other person to perform recovery, just there. Close. Waiting. This is the skill that Marceline has developed across 1,000 years of being the one who stays after everyone else leaves. Not comfort in the manufactured sense, but genuine, patient, unhurrying presence. She knows how to sit with loss. She has been doing it longer than anyone. They are warmer after this. Something has been re-established, not the old thing, which was more innocent and less textured, but something better. Something built from what they have both learned about themselves in the years apart. Something that can hold their differences now rather than being broken by them. Bubblegum is still going to be obsessive and controlling. Marceline is still going to be chaotic and avoidant. They are still, in the fundamental ways, themselves. But they are themselves in a context where they have both done enough work to be able to see each other more clearly. To be genuinely curious about the person rather than threatened by the parts that are different. In the Stakes miniseries, Bubblegum calls Marceline her best friend. Says she is happy about the prospect of getting to hang out with her forever. It is a small line and it carries enormous weight because this is Bubblegum, who does not say that kind of thing lightly or frequently, who has spent centuries managing her attachments with the careful precision of someone who learned to be cautious about how much she invests. Best friend. Forever. This is where they are when the show's final season begins building toward its conclusion. And it turns out Forever has some specific content to it that is worth unpacking. This is one of the most economical pieces of character writing in the show. A single physical response that contains about 1,000 years of held feeling. All the years of Simon being gone. All the years of the Ice King being there instead. A painful presence rather than an absence because at least absence is clean. All the longing for the person who found her in the ruins and gave her a stuffed bear and sang cheers to make her laugh. She faints because the relief is too large for her body to hold upright. Simon, in his brief return to himself, is trying to do something. He needs to find Betty, his fiancée who left because of the crown's influence on him, and who he has been missing across 1,000 years of not quite knowing who she was. There is a way to reach her, but it requires a sacrifice. It requires Hambo, the stuffed bear. The thing Marceline traded so much to get back, that Bubblegum gave up her most treasured shirt to retrieve. That has been the last physical remnant of Simon's kindness to her across all these centuries. She gives it without hesitation. She gives it because Simon is standing there, present and real and aware, and the person she loves most in the world is asking her for something. And maybe also because she has carried Hambo for so long, not because she needed the bear, but because she needed the connection. And now the connection is standing in front of her asking for help, and the bear is just an object. Simon uses Hambo to open a time portal. Betty comes through. Simon and Betty are reunited briefly before the crown's effects return, and Simon slides back into the Ice King and the window closes. It is not long enough. It is never long enough. Simon and Marceline barely have time to speak before the transformation reasserts itself. There are things unsaid. There are years of being apart that do not get addressed. Marceline watches the Ice King return and Simon disappear back behind the madness. Season 8 offers a partial remedy in Broke His Crown, which is structured around Marceline, Bubblegum, and the Ice King, and which sends Marceline and Bubblegum into the crown's interior magical architecture looking for a technical fix. Inside the crown's labyrinthine mental space, they encounter Simon Petrikov himself, not as he appears outside, but as a projection of the real person who still lives somewhere inside the structure the crown built around him. Simon in this space is lucid. He is himself. He helps them fix what needs fixing. And before they leave, he apologizes to Marceline for how the brief return played out in Betty, for spending the whole time working on Betty rather than catching up with her. He says he is sorry. He says she is important. Marceline tells him it is fine, that she understood. And she means it in the complicated way that you can mean something and also feel the loss of the thing you are forgiving simultaneously. I want to go back in and visit sometime, she says, about the crown's interior space where Simon exists. Bubblegum tells her that the reprogramming means that will not be possible. Marceline does not say anything to that. The show gives her a moment of quiet. You can see the cost of it in her face. And then there is Varmints. This is the episode where Bubblegum has been removed from the Candy Kingdom throne by popular vote. King of Ooh, a charismatic huckster, has won an election and taken her place, and is alone for the first time in a very long while, without the structure that has defined her for centuries. She and Marceline end up working together to deal with Varmints eating Bubblegum's pumpkins, which leads them into the old crystal mines where they used to spend time when things between them were good, and where the past sits around them like sediment. Bubblegum opens up about the pressure she has been under, the exhaustion of responsibility, the way it felt when she had to start pushing everyone away to manage the weight of what she was doing. She does not exactly apologize, but she explains. She lets Marceline see the interior that she almost never shows anyone. Marceline, who has been let down by enough people to recognize the difference between someone who does not care and someone who cares so much they got lost in it, receives this. She stays. They work together. They go on being in each other's company with a warmth that is new again and old at the same time, re-established after years apart. The foundation, which neither of them had ever quite dismantled, is back. Part 10. The finale and everything. After the series finale of Adventure Time is 44 minutes long. It is structured around what is called the Gum War, a conflict between Princess Bubblegum and her great-uncle Gumbold, who has spent centuries nursing a grievance about being turned into a simple candy being by his niece and is now, having re-emerged, ready to resolve that grievance at scale. Finn and Jake and Marceline and the entire array of the Candy Kingdom's defenders face off against Gumbold's forces in what is set up as the climactic conflict of the series. The show spends a significant portion of the finale doing something unexpected. It tries to make the Gum War unnecessary. Finn engineers a situation where Bubblegum and Gumbold have to meet in a dream space rather than on a battlefield. It almost works. There is a moment where violence seems genuinely avoidable, where the thing that has been building toward catastrophe might redirect into something else. And then Gumbold's actual character asserts itself, and the betrayal happens anyway, because Gumbold is who Gumbold is, and wanting things to be different does not change who people fundamentally are. Marceline is present throughout the final preparations, in the way she is always present for the people she loves. Not leading, not managing, not in charge, but there. She has her own role in the battle, her own set of contributions to make. She is one of the most powerful beings in the land of Ooh when she chooses to be, and she knows it, and she does not need to announce it. And then Golb arrives and everything else becomes irrelevant. Golb is the embodiment of chaos and discord in the show's cosmology. Not moralized evil, not a villain with an agenda, but something more fundamental, the entropic principle made manifest. The dissolution of order, the unmaking of things that have been made. Golb's creatures, which emerge from its body and terrorize Ooh during the finale, do not operate on strategy. They operate on the pure logic of unmaking, of reducing whatever they encounter to the chaos that preceded it. Marceline tells the gathered armies, when Golb appears, that if it is not stopped, Ooh is finished. She says this with a particular quality in her voice, not panic, because she has seen enough to be past panic, but with the weight of someone who has been alive long enough to know the difference between bad and catastrophic. This is catastrophic. The battle that follows is chaotic in every dimension. Creatures from Golb's body, multiple character arcs reaching their crescendos simultaneously. Betty Groff, who has been operating under increasingly unstable magical conditions throughout the season, making her final gambit, attempting to use Golb's power to restore Margles and to transform the Ice King back into Simon. The gambit involves fusing with the entity, which is not something any reasonable person would plan as a solution. But Betty has moved past the realm of reasonable plans into the realm of necessary ones. Inside Golb, the Ice King and Finn and Betty are caught together. Betty is trying to use Golb. Golb is not the kind of entity that gets used. Ice King, terrified and unstable, tries to reach Betty. And Betty, in the most fully Betty moment of everything she has done, realizes that her truest wish is to save Simon. Not to save herself, not to achieve her plan, but to save him. To make it so he is okay, because that is what she has wanted, underneath all the elaborate magical schemes and alliances and power gathering, to save him. The crown, which responds to the sincere wishes of its wearers, responds to this. It grants it. Betty is consumed by Golb, and they exit the planet together, and the crown is left behind. Simon Petrikov is himself again. He is standing in the ruins of the battle, because Golb does leave ruins, does leave the mark of its passage, and he is himself. Fully. No crown. No Ice King. Just Simon, the way he was before he ever found that thing in the dockworker's shop. And Marceline comforts him, because Betty is gone. Because even in the version where everything goes right, something is lost. Simon is himself, finally, completely, and the woman he has been trying to get back to for 1,000 years is the reason he is himself, and also now unreachable. The reunion he has been oriented toward for centuries happened and then ended in the same moment. This is what love does in Adventure Time. It is real, and it is costly, and it does not solve everything. Betty loved Simon so completely that she destroyed herself to save him. Simon's love for Betty oriented everything he did for 1,000 years, even when he had no conscious access to who she was. The emotion survives even when the memory does not. The love is real even when its object is lost. Marceline knows about this. She has been carrying exactly this knowledge her entire life. She is the person best equipped in this moment to sit with Simon in the ruins and let him feel what he needs to feel without trying to fix it or redirect it or make it smaller. She has done this before. She has done this for 1,000 years with her own version of it. She holds him. She lets him grieve. She stays. And then, in the middle of the battle, before this, the moment the finale builds to, the moment that the whole show has been building to, Bubblegum almost dies. A Golb creature is upon her. She is barely escaping. And Marceline is there, suddenly, completely present, catching her, holding her, both of them catching their breath while the battle rages around them. And Marceline says she was terrified, that she could not lose her again. I don't want to lose you, spoken clearly, without any of the careful management that has been part of their relationship for centuries. No performance, no deflection, just the actual truth of what she feels said out loud, to the person it is about. They kiss. It is not a dramatic movie kiss. It is two people who have been circling each other for several hundred years, finally being still enough to let the circling stop. It is Marceline who spent so long making herself unavailable to the things she wanted, finally just wanting something and letting that be enough. It is Bubblegum who spent so long being too busy for her own feelings, letting the feelings have the floor. In the epilogue that the show runs over its final song, the Island Song, the end credits melody that has been playing at the close of Adventure Time episodes for years, now expanded into a closing montage that checks in with everyone. Marceline and Bubblegum are on a couch together. Close. At ease. The particular ease of people who have figured out how to be in each other's company without either of them having to manage themselves into something they are not. The show ends. But the story does not. Obsidian, the second Distant Lands special, released in November 2020, takes place some years after the series finale. Marceline and Bubblegum are together in the fullest sense. They are sharing domestic space, they are making furniture together and caring for each other. They are having the ordinary small arguments of people who live in close proximity and have very different instincts about most practical questions. Bubblegum refers to Marceline as her vampire girlfriend, with the easy, possessive warmth of someone who has been given permission to say what they feel and is enjoying it. They are also, both of them, still themselves. Bubblegum still leans toward control. Marceline still leans toward chaos. These tendencies have not been eliminated by love. Love does not eliminate the fundamental traits that make us who we are. It just provides a context in which those traits can be worked with rather than around. They are learning still. They will always be learning, probably. But they are learning together, which is different from learning alone. The Glass Kingdom calls them back. Molto Larvo is awake again. The old containment has cracked. The same problem that they helped with centuries ago, the same dragon, the same kingdom made of glass, but everything else is different. Most importantly, Marceline is different. The punk anger that sealed the dragon the first time is gone. Not suppressed, genuinely gone, burned through by everything that has happened, by the acceptance she found at the end of Stakes, and the relationships she has built since. Her music is different now. It is more open, more direct in the ways that matter, and less defended in the ways that used to be her primary mode. She cannot manufacture the old anger on demand, and she spends a portion of the special trying, going back into the desert to find it, reaching for the old wound that used to be always available. It is not there the way it used to be, because the wound is not the same wound it used to be. The thing that fed the punk rock was the specific grief of someone who has lost everything and is managing that loss by converting it into energy. She still has grief, but it is different grief, older, more settled, less urgent. It is the grief of someone who has found what they were looking for and knows, that the finding does not erase the losing but changes its character. The flashbacks in Obsidian are the ones that do the most important remaining work in Marceline's story, because they give us Elise. Really give us Elise, not in brief glimpses, but in something with shape and depth. A young Marceline and her mother walking through the desert. The map Elise draws, the story she tells about the secret clubhouse, and the recording Elise left behind in the shelter she was guiding Marceline toward, for when her daughter arrived without her. Elise knew she was dying. She had been protecting Marceline from knowing it, the way parents protect children from truths the children are not yet equipped to carry. She made the map. She arranged the destination. And she left a message, a recording, for the version of Marceline who would eventually arrive, maybe years later, maybe centuries, and need to hear it. The message says she did not abandon her, that she held on as long as she could, that she loved her completely and without qualification, the demon aspects and the human aspects and all the parts in between, that the silence at the end was not rejection, but the limit of a dying body. That she did not leave because of what Marceline was. She left because she ran out of time. Marceline has believed, at some level, for 1,000 years, that her mother left her, that she was abandoned, that there was something about her, the strangeness, the pointed ears, the half-demon nature that made her hard to stay beside. This belief has been part of the deep structure of everything she has built, every wall and every trickster performance and every test she put people through to see if they would stay. It was built on a misunderstanding, on the terrible accident of a child being too young to comprehend what mortality looks like from the outside when you are living it from the inside. She wasn't abandoned, she was loved. The silence was grief, not rejection. What closes the Glass Kingdom in the end is a love song. A direct, open, unguarded expression of what Marceline feels for Bubblegum. The kind of song she could not have written in the years when she was protecting herself from exactly this kind of exposure. The dragon responds to authenticity, and the most authentic thing Marceline has ever been is in love, and she is finally not afraid to say so. She sings it. Molto Larvo is contained. The Glass Kingdom is safe. And the show makes its final statement about what it has been building toward all this time. That cracks are not failures. That they are the record of what you have survived. That they are, in the specific logic of these glass people who treat their cracks with horror, actually what makes you beautiful. What makes you specific. What makes you irreducibly yourself. Marceline has more cracks than anyone. She has been cracking and repairing for 1,000 years. Every scar from every loss, every old grief, every moment of being left and being found and being left again, all of it is visible in her, if you know how to look. None of it could be removed without removing what she is. And what she is, in the fullness of what the show has shown us, is extraordinary, is worth every crack, is worth all of it. The Fiona and Cake series, which continued the Adventure Time franchise into its most adult phase yet, includes Marceline in the matter-of-fact way of a show that knows its characters have earned their happiness. She is getting tattoos with Bubblegum, an activity complicated by her healing ability and Bubblegum's gummy skin, both of which make the tattooist's job ridiculous. She ends a phone call with Simon early because the tattoo situation is getting out of hand. She is living the domestic, ordinary, particular life that 1,000 years of extraordinary history has been leading toward. Simon, for his part, is figuring out how to be himself in a world that has entirely moved on from the world he knew before the crown. He is teaching at a magic school. He is trying to understand why he does not fit in with anyone. He misses Marceline. He does not want to burden her with how lost he feels, so he pretends to be fine when she calls. She probably knows he is pretending because she has known him for 1,000 years and knows what fine sounds like when it actually is fine. But she lets him have it for now. They will talk about it properly, eventually. The relationship between them is not a tragedy anymore. It is complicated and ongoing and warm in the specific way of people who have been through the worst together and come out still glad to know each other. Simon is himself and Marceline is herself, and they are, in the best possible way, still connected. Still gravitating toward each other. Not because the crown compels it anymore, but because they genuinely want to be in each other's lives. This is the ending Marceline's story was building toward all along. Not a final defeat of something. Not a heroic sacrifice. Not the dramatic conclusion of a 1,000-year arc. Just this. Ordinary life. Matching tattoos that do not take because her body heals too fast and Bubblegum's skin is the wrong texture. So they sit in a tattoo parlor, failing at something normal together. Simon calling from a bar, trying not to say the sad thing. And Marceline on the other end of the line hearing it anyway. The cave with the murals on the walls, the bass guitar, the bowl of strawberries. 1,000 years of grief and love and loss and survival and music and art and all the things she made from what she felt. And it led here. To this. To being known and loved and in possession of a life she actually wants. Somewhere in the land of Ooh, there is a cave. The walls are covered in 1,000 years of images, faces and places and moments that no one else is old enough to remember, rendered in whatever colors were available, layered over each other in the way that meaningful things accumulate over time. A bass guitar leans against the stone made from a battle axe that was in the family long before Marceline was born. A bowl of strawberries sits on a table, their red not fully drained yet, still waiting. Marceline Abadir, the vampire queen, is there. She has always been there. She will always be there. She was born in the ruins of the old world, and she watched the new one grow up around her. She lost her mother to a war she was too young to understand. She found a man in the rubble who became her father in all the ways that mattered, and then lost him to a crown that could not be refused. She spent centuries as the last vampire, the last of her kind, carrying the powers of the creatures she killed as both weapon and reminder. She loved people and was hurt by them and kept loving people anyway, because the alternative, the version of herself that stopped, was not a version she could live in. She made songs from her grief. She painted the cave walls with the faces of the people she loved. She played the same melody as a stranger in the ruins to say, "I am here and I mean no harm. And I would like, if you will let me, to know you." She gave away the thing she treasured most to help someone else reach the thing they treasured most. She sang a letter written for her in ruins to the diminished ghost of the person who wrote it, while he played drums badly and did not know he was participating in his own memorial. She kept going, not because she had to, because she chose to, every time. If you made it all the way to the end of Marceline's story, I want you to know something. You were not just watching a cartoon. You were sitting with one of the most carefully built portraits of grief and survival and love, and what it means to keep being yourself across an enormous stretch of time that has been put on a screen. Pendleton Ward and the Adventure Time writing team, and Rebecca Sugar and the countless artists and directors and voice actors who gave Marceline her shape and her sound, they built something real. Something that holds up against the actual weight of what it describes. Marceline is over 1,000 years old and she is still here. And she is finally home. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Hit like if this story got its hooks into you the way it gets its hooks into me. Subscribe if you are not already. We do this every week, taking our time with the characters and the worlds that deserve more than a quick summary. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from, and what time it is there, and which part of Marceline's story hit you the hardest. I read them all. The cave has enough wall space for everyone. Wherever you are, rest well. The wreckage of the world will still be there in the morning. Tonight you get to float in the dark, and remember that every story about someone who kept going is, at its core, a story for everyone who is still going. Dozing off time. The entire story of Marceline, Adventure Time. And then, halfway through, Golb arrives. Golb is, in the show's cosmology, the embodiment of chaos and discord. Not evil in the moralized way of a villain, not pursuing any agenda a human mind could follow, but something more purely entropic. The dissolution of order. The unmaking of things. Golb was summoned by Betty Groff and King Man in an attempt to restore Margles, King Man's dead wife, and simultaneously transform the Ice King back into Simon. The summoning worked, but the consequences were not what anyone intended, because Golb cannot be directed. Golb simply is. Marceline, watching the sky crack open and something vast and structurally wrong pour through it, tells the gathered armies that if Golb is not stopped, Ooh is finished. Not in distress exactly, in the urgent, matter-of-fact way of someone who has seen enough to know what real threats feel like. The battle against Golb is one of the show's largest set pieces. Creatures from inside Golb's body, transformation and horror, the various characters of Ooh fighting desperately, and in the middle of this, Bubblegum is nearly killed. Marceline reaches her just in time. She has Bubblegum in her arms, both of them catching their breath, the battle still raging. And Marceline, who has been deflecting real feeling for 1,000 years, who learned early that loving people was dangerous because people left, says that she was terrified, that she did not want to lose her again. They kiss. The show does not make a production of it. The storyboard artist Hannah K. Nystrom added the kiss to the scene, drawing it from a note that simply said, "Marceline and Bubblegum have a moment." The kiss was not in the original script. It was one person's recognition that this was where the story had been going, that there was no honest version of this moment that did not include this, and that the right thing to do was to draw it. Golb is ultimately defeated when Betty, who has been possessed by the entity, realizes that her truest wish is to save Simon. And because that wish is genuinely hers, genuinely felt, the Crown responds to it and grants it, fusing Betty with Golb and exiting the planet. The Ice King is restored briefly to Simon before Gunther, one of the Ice King's penguins, puts the crown on and becomes the new Ice Thing. Simon is left free. He is human again, truly himself, the first time that has been true in over 1,000 years. Marceline comforts him as he mourns Betty. In the epilogue montage that plays over the show's closing song, Marceline and Bubblegum are shown together on a couch. close. At ease with each other in the specific way of people who have decided to stop running from something good. Not perfectly resolved. They are complicated people who love each other in complicated ways and will probably keep finding new things to work through, but together. The series ends, but Marceline's story does not quite end there. Because Adventure Time continued in the HBO Max Distant Lands specials, and the second of those specials, Obsidian, released in November 2020, is arguably the most complete account of who Marceline is and how she got there that the franchise ever produced. It takes place some years after the series finale. Marceline and Bubblegum are genuinely together now. They are sharing domestic space. Bubblegum refers to Marceline as her vampire girlfriend, with the easy, slightly possessive warmth of someone who has been given license to say what they feel and is enjoying it. They are also navigating the specific challenge of being very different people who have both independently developed habits for dealing with the world that sometimes rub against each other. Glassboy, a young glass person, summons them back to the Glass Kingdom. The dragon Molto Larvo has reawakened, and the old crack in its containment has opened again. The Glass Kingdom needs Marceline's music to shut it down. Except Marceline has changed. The punk rock fury that sealed the dragon centuries ago is no longer the primary register of her emotional life. She has found, over the years since the series ended, something closer to peace than she has known since before the Mushroom War. Her music reflects that now. It is warmer, more open, less constructed from the materials of unprocessed grief. She cannot generate the old anger on demand because the old anger was a symptom of wounds that have been, in important ways, addressed. The Glass Kingdom's problem is not just that the dragon is back. It is that the solution from before will not work anymore because she is not who she was. The episode fills in the gaps of Elise's story. In flashbacks woven throughout the special, young Marceline and her mother trace the map that Elise drew, heading for the bunker. And Marceline finally finds what her mother left behind. A recording. A message Elise made knowing she was not going to make it, knowing her daughter might eventually reach this place and find it waiting. Elise did not abandon Marceline. She held on as long as she could, and she left everything she had behind for her daughter to find. She was sick. She was dying. She loved her child completely, and the silence at the end of her life that Marceline experienced as abandonment was not abandonment, but limitation. The limit of what a dying human body could do, not a reflection of how much she was loved. Marceline has believed, on some deep and not fully examined level, that her mother left because of her, because of the demonic aspect, because she was something too strange to stay beside. This has been part of the architecture of her self-understanding for 1,000 years. Mothers leave, fathers leave. Simon left. Everyone leaves. The recording says otherwise. What defeats the dragon in the end is not the old punk anger. It is a love song. A genuine, open, unguarded expression of devotion to Bubblegum. The kind of song Marceline could not have written in the years when she was building walls, when she was making herself small enough to fit inside a life that would not break if the worst happened, when she was keeping everyone at arm's length as a survival strategy. The power that the Glass Kingdom needs is not the power of her pain. It is the power of her love. She sings. Molto Larvo is contained, the Glass Kingdom celebrates. And Marceline and Bubblegum, who have been working through the same old tensions of their different natures throughout the special, Bubblegum's impulse toward control, Marceline's need for authenticity, the places where these grind against each other, come to a moment of real understanding. Bubblegum's brilliance matters. Marceline's rawness matters. Neither of them has to become the other. They work. The episode ends with a reconciliation between Glassboy and See-Through Princess, and with the show stating as clearly as it ever states anything, that cracks are not flaws. They are the record of what you have survived. They are how light gets in. They are what makes you what you are, and there is no version of being alive that does not include them. The Fiona and Cake series, the third main installment in the Adventure Time franchise, which ran on HBO Max beginning in 2023 and continued into a second season, includes Marceline in the particular way that Distant Lands era Adventure Time includes its characters, as someone who has moved into a different chapter. She is living with Bubblegum. They are trying to get matching tattoos, a project complicated by Marceline's vampiric healing ability and Bubblegum's gummy arm, both of which make the tattoo artist's job impossible. This is a perfect detail. A 1,000-year-old vampire queen and a centuries-old candy princess in a tattoo parlor, failing at something ordinary, frustrated together. This is domestic life. This is what it looks like when the story settles into itself. Simon Petrikov, freed from the Ice King persona by the finale's events, is trying to find his footing in a world that has moved entirely past everything he knew before the crown. He calls Marceline. He misses her. He does not want to burden her with how lost he feels, so he pretends to be fine, and they make a vague plan to hang out later that both of them probably know will not happen soon. This is a different kind of loss from the old ones. Not abandonment, not death, not disappearance, but the particular difficulty of two people who care about each other, failing to quite reach across the distance of their different circumstances. Simon is surrounded by people from Ooh and cannot relate to any of them. Marceline is happy in a way that does not leave much room for other people's pain, and she knows this about herself, and she is not sure what to do with it. But they will figure it out. Because Simon is still Simon, finally and completely, and Marceline is still Marceline, and they have navigated 1,000 years of much harder obstacles than this one. Somewhere in Ooh there is a cave. The walls are covered in art, 1,000 years of images layered over each other. The whole visual record of a life that was never supposed to last this long. A bass guitar leans against the stone. A bowl of strawberries sits on a table, their red not quite drained, still waiting. Marceline is there, has been there, will be there. She has done something remarkable across the 1,000 years of her story. She has survived the Mushroom War and survived losing her mother and survived losing Simon and survived losing him again. Slowly to the crown. She has survived being turned into a vampire against her will and spent centuries as the last of her kind. She has been in love and been betrayed and been abandoned and been found and been lost again. She has kept making music through all of it, kept painting the cave walls, kept carrying Hambo across centuries until she had to let him go, kept finding people and caring for them, and enduring the specific agony of caring for people when you will outlive all of them. She did not come out of it whole, in the way of someone who has never been broken. She came out of it woven, repaired over and over with the particular craft of someone who has had a lot of practice, with visible seams and patches and places where the repair work is part of the surface rather than hidden beneath it. She is stronger there in those places, not in spite of what she went through, but because of how she chose to go through it. She chose music. She chose honesty when honesty was the hardest option. She chose to let people in even after she had learned how much that cost. She chose to come back, again and again, to the people she loved, even when the smart thing would have been to hold herself further back. She chose Bubblegum, finally and completely and with her whole self, because after 1,000 years of survival, she finally understood that the person who keeps the shirt is the person worth staying for. Marceline the Vampire Queen. The girl born in the ruins of the old world. The last friend of Simon Petrikov. The demon-human hybrid who became the last vampire, not as a curse, but as a consequence of protecting people who needed protecting. The musician who transmuted 1,000 years of loss into songs that said what she could not otherwise say. She is over 1,000 years old and she is still going. And she has at last a place she wants to be. That is the entire story of Marceline. From the first ruins to the cave with the murals on the walls, from Hambo to the rock shirt to the kiss in the middle of the battle with Golb. Thank you for spending this time here, for letting this story wash over you in the quiet. If you made it this far, hit that like button. It genuinely helps. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit subscribe because there are so many more stories like this one waiting. Every week we take our time with the characters who deserve it. And Marceline, more than almost anyone in Adventure Time, deserves it. Whatever time it is and wherever you are, rest well. The wreckage of the world can wait until morning.